Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network. Any opinions or comments made by any guest are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect any of the presenters or network's opinions.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Having a lift car, we can't get the light all to work. 244, we're at the far side of the second farmer's field, and made sighting again about 110 degrees. This looks like it's clear out to the coast. It's right on the horizon. Moves about a bit and flashes from time to time. Still steady or red in color. Also, after negative readings in the satellite field, we're picking up slight readings, 4 or 5 clicks now on the meter. 305, we see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. 305 at about 10 degrees horizon directly north. We've got 2 strange objects, half moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. 400 hours, one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon.
This is Sasha Christie, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, the UK's biggest paranormal network. And this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show, and I wish you a happy new year. Thank you for that intro, Sasha. Now, Sasha Christie was the one that she had an Ultimate Bravery in Ufology Award presented to her at the Woodbridge Conference, which we're going to be talking about today. I'd also like to thank COAG Music, that's co.ag music, for allowing me to use that intro at the beginning of the show. Very atmospheric, I thought. Right, now, I hope everyone listened to last week's show, which was a 40th anniversary of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. But today, I've got Colonel Halt with a whole new show and a new interview. But before that new interview, you'll hear Colonel Halt's presentation at Woodbridge in Suffolk on Sunday, the 8th of September 2019. We actually spoke about it before, last week, and I actually interviewed Colonel Halt the day after, and you heard that interview last week on the show, but you didn't actually hear the conference before, this is what you're going to hear tonight, and then you'll hear the new interview after. So before we get into all of that, I'd like to say thank you for all the Happy New Year wishes that have been sent and everything, and I wish you all a Happy New Year in return. I hope it's a better year than 2020. Now this is show number 99, so it's quite a special show. So, here we go. This is Colonel Halt, Sunday, the 8th of September 2019.
What I'm going to do this afternoon is give you a little background. I'm going to walk you through basically what I know happened and what I was told, and then we'll go into a whole lot of aspects of the different phases of what went on and the issues, and we're going to talk a little bit also about Larry Warren. I don't want to focus on that too much. Sasha did a good job, but I have to say a couple things about Larry Warren. Number one, I'm here because of him, because I'd never gone public if he hadn't worked with Peter Robbins on the book Left at the East Gate. That just rankled me something terrible. I never wanted to get involved. I didn't want any publicity. I didn't particularly want to be here, but I'm happy to be here now. But so I have to say, but he's not the original whistleblower. The original whistleblower is a cop by the name of J.D. Ingalls, who talked to Brenda Butler, who's sitting over there, Dot Street, and Jenny Randalls. That's where the story really became public. Even though J.D. Ingalls spreading disinformation and trying to make a lot of fuss about it and distract everybody, he did start the story, so we have to accept that. Well, let me start a little bit about me. John showed my childhood pictures. I didn't intend for him to do that, but then nonetheless, whatever. I was sort of a left alone child, I guess the best way to put it, pretty much on my own the whole time I was growing up. If I wanted something, I had to get her to do it myself. When I was 8 years old, I was delivering the morning newspapers. I could hardly carry the sack. I mowed lawns, I cut grass, I raked leaves. As soon as I was old enough, I set pins in the bowling alley. That was before the automated machines. I worked in the grocery store, cash register, you name it, I did it. By the time I was 16, I had my own Harley-Davidson motorcycle and my own car, and to save money for college. I had enough for my first year after I sold my car and motorcycle and whatnot. My second year, I had a little problem. I didn't have quite enough money, so I went to Dad and I said, gee, Dad, will you help finance my college? And he said, quit school and go to work. Go back after you get enough money. Well, I didn't do that. I held 3 or 4 jobs. I washed dishes. I ran a fraternity house. I tutored students. You name it. I got through school. Suddenly I had some fantastic job offers, but they all said the same thing. Finish your military obligation and come back, because there was a draft in those days, and guess who was A1? Well, the draft board was breathing down my back, so I went and talked to all the recruiters. I didn't want to go in the Marine Corps. I wasn't too excited about that, and I certainly didn't want to go in the Army. I almost signed up for the Navy. I took the physical and all the tests and passed them, and I decided 6 months at sea every year was too much. So I joined the Air Force. They sent me to OTS and I got a commission. Immediately I went to school for a year in the Air Force, 8 months. It was great. I went to school and got paid for it. Got the equivalent of a graduate degree in maintenance engineering. And I did that for the next 17 years. Well, 1979 found me in the Pentagon managing most of the Air Force's jet engine fleet. It was a small office. There was a senior lieutenant colonel, a major, myself, a new lieutenant colonel, a captain, and a civilian, plus the secretary and a few tech reps. Well, my tour was up. I'd been there for 3 years, and that was the end of the assignment. The personnel center called me and said, we've got a good deal for you. Oh, I was getting nervous when people would tell me that. They said, how would you like to go to Iran? Is it an air advisor to the Shah of Iran? I said, I'm not so sure about that. About all I knew is where the country was and not much more. So they said, here's the name of the incumbent and the phone number. Call him up. So I called the guy. And he said, this is the best kept secret in the Air Force. He said, you won't believe it. The Shah loves me. He said, the whole staff is fantastic to work with. You work regular hours. You can't rent or buy a house. They provide your housing. They pay for your utilities. You can't bring a car, but they give you a car and driver. You can go anywhere you want. Once a month you get to go to Germany, and if you're married, your wife can go with you, or to Turkey and shop for things you can't find here. And by the way, you don't pay income tax. You can save almost all your money. So I called the personnel people back and said, sign me up. So I ordered a Farsi language course and started reading. And suddenly I realized the Shah was in pretty poor health, and the mullahs, the senior religious leaders, were just raising Cain, and there were some riots and a lot of problems. And I got a little nervous. And I thought, I'm not so sure I want to do this. Well, at the same time, my boss, the lieutenant colonel, retired. The major got riffed, got passed over and booted out of the Air Force. The captain got reassigned, and the civilian came down with a terminal illness and left. Suddenly I was the only one in the office for the secretary, and we had a big input into the Air Force budget cycle. Somebody from our office had to go brief the subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations and Finance Committee. So I went to the general I worked for and said, boss, if you can get me out of that assignment to Iran, I'll stay for another year and train some people. He said, you're on. He went to the vice chief of the Air Force, and I got a 1-year extension. The poor lieutenant that replaced me became one of the hostages that was there for, a year and a half or whatever it was. I just dodged a bullet by about that much. Anyhow, the year was up, my extension. I got another call from personnel, and they said, again, another one of these good deals. Apparently I was in what they call a special monitoring program, good promotions, potential assignments. They said, how would you like to go to Oslo, Norway, as commander of U.S. forces? Because we had a small contingent, a couple hundred American military people. I said, wow, I will take it. They called back 2 days later and said, well, the SINK, that's the 4-star commander in Germany, the exec wants the job, and we're not going to turn a 4-star down. So, but we have good news for you. RAF Bentwaters needs a deputy base commander. I said, great. I knew a little bit about Bentwaters. I knew it was a big base. I knew they had A-10s. So I packed up and I went to Bentwaters. Great assignment. I really loved it. At that time, most of you know about the base. It was the largest tactical fighter wing in the free world. Huge operation. RAF Bentwaters, RAF Woodbridge, 6 forward operating locations in Germany. You couldn't miss it. The base population was between 12 and 14,000 cotton dependents and civilians. It was a big American city, really. The mission of the base at that time was, if something happened, we would pack up all the aircraft and go to the forward operating locations in Germany and go kill tanks and armor. Now keep in mind, this is 1980. 1980, the Chinese were shelling the offshore islands, Matsu and Quemoy, and threatening Taiwan. The Red Army Brigade was loose in Germany, raising Cain. They kidnapped an American general, General Dozier. Poland was having problems or issues with Solidarity. The Russians had moved armor and heavy divisions up to the border with Germany and Poland. And the CIA was saying there's a very good possibility of an invasion, especially into Poland. So there was tense times. So we exercised all the time. And you haven't lived till you spend 8 or 10 hours, maybe more, in a gas mask and a chemical suit and try and operate when the gas mask continually fogs up and you have to go to the bathroom or you get thirsty or hungry. Just a nightmare. But anyhow, it was a good assignment. Things were pretty quiet through the summer. We exercised regularly and things worked well. At the end of the year, we decided to have the end of the year sort of a Christmas party, year-end party, and recognize people for what they'd done during the year. It was kind of a festive move. We tried to get the Officers Club to hold it there, but we had waited too long and other organizations had booked everything there, and the only thing available was the Woody Bar. The Woody Bar was a small Quonset hut on Woodbridge Base. It had very little facilities. At one time it had been a fighter club, as they called it, and quite an active place. But it was just used for parties. In other words, there was no maitre d', there were no waiters, there were no bars. If you wanted something, you took it and had your party. So we had a covered dish dinner and brought everything we needed. It was a nice affair. Well, let me back up a little bit now to before, a couple of days before. The night of December 25th, Christmas, the morning of the 26th, Boxing Day. I normally went around the base. Part of my job as the base commander, or deputy base commander, was to know what was going on. And I learned very quickly there's no better way to learn than to get out at night, ride with the police, visit the fire department, go down to finance during the day when they're working, and all the other operations on the base. So I knew who the movers and shakers were and what was going on the base. I learned very quickly that the colonels weren't running the base. They were making big decisions, but the senior NCOs were running the base. And those were my source. Those are the young troops that are in the front line. So, on the morning of December 26th, I stopped by the police station, 5:30, 6 o'clock, somewhere around there. I did that quite often, to pick up the police blotters. The police blotters were the chronological listing of everything that the police had been involved in for the previous 24 hours. And they were normally quite interesting. I walked into the police station, and the desk sergeant on duty was Sergeant, we called him Crash, was his nickname, McCabe. They called him Crash for a good reason. He had a good sense of humor, and they were always tormenting him. When I walked in, he started laughing. I said, what's so funny? I mean, here's a guy that's been working all night. It's 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and he's laughing. I said, what's so funny? He said, Colonel, you're not going to believe this. He said, last night, Peniston, Burroughs, and Cabanas were out in the woods chasing UFOs all night, and the lieutenant, the on-duty senior police officer, said, don't put anything in the police blotters. Well, at first I thought he was kidding me. And he said, no, I'm serious. I said, well, what do you know? He said, well, just after midnight, Sergeant Burroughs, who was one of the police officers, went up to the back gate at RAF Woodbridge to check the integrity of the gate. We didn't man the gate at night. In fact, we only manned it during the day or during exercises because we just didn't have enough people to man it full time. He said he saw something, but he thought it was a downed aircraft. So he called his partner, Bud Steffens, the other patrolman there, and they came out and took a look. And they could see something in the forest. In those days, if you went to the east gate, you could see all the way out to the Forest Service Road. It was just low ferns and whatnot. And there was a field across the way, so you could almost see through the Corsica pine to the coast.
Nowadays you can't see anything, it's all grown up. So anyhow, he said they saw something, they went down and investigated. I didn't learn this until last month. I didn't know they went off the base. They went off the base in one of the police cars and drove down to the Forest Service Road and verified there was something there. Now, they never should have gone off the base because they were armed. We had a policy with the police. You never left the base unless you were armed. If we ever had to move even small arms from one base to the other, they were done in a convoy and very carefully controlled. It was a very sensitive issue, and I think you all can understand that. We didn't want anybody getting hold of an automatic weapon. Now let me explain the police a little bit before we go further. The security police in the Air Force have actually two career fields, security and law enforcement. Security is charged with air-based ground defense. They're charged with guarding the weapons, guarding the airplanes. That's what they do specifically. They wear fatigues, they carry automatic weapons, and they have authorization in certain circumstances to use deadly force. Law enforcement are cops like you and I know. They write speeding tickets, they investigate crime, they man the main gates, and they take care of domestics, robberies, anything else a normal police officer would do. They wear a blue uniform, have a .38 revolver, a radio, a nice stick, and whatever. We had 4 flights of security and 4 flights of law enforcement, A, B, C, and D. They rotated shifts. Each law enforcement and security had their own little, what I'm going to call it, flight. Each flight had a master or tech sergeant and the appropriate number of people. We kept 2 patrolmen on Bentwaters, law enforcement, and 2 on Woodbridge. Police 1 and 2, police 1 being the senior officer or senior NCO who floated, police 2 and 3 who patrolled Bentwaters, police 4 and 5 patrolled Woodbridge. Now we had continual problems, personnel problems with security. The reason being, the recruiters that put these 18, 19-year-old kids in the Air Force would tell them, you want to be a cop? I'll make you a cop in the Air Force. Well, in their mind, they're going to see blue lights and a lot of excitement, writing traffic tickets, meeting people, etc. So they go through school as security and they come over to Bentwaters. We give them a gun and stand them out in the middle of nowhere for 8 hours. It's a very boring, difficult job to do. So we had a lot of issues with them, behavioral problems, I guess is the best way to put it. Not just at Bentwaters, everywhere. It's just that career field is a tough career field to be in. So you understand the difference. So Burroughs and Steffens, who are law enforcement, go to the gate, drive out the gate, come back. They realize there's something in the forest. They're firmly convinced it's a downed aircraft or something. So instead of putting it on the radio, because a whole lot of people have scanners, they knew if they put something on the radio, they get a whole lot of attention if it turned out to be nothing. They went back to the guard shack at the east gate, which has been replaced. It used to be a little 3 or 4 by 4 building with a small phone in it. They called the desk sergeant, Sergeant McCabe. They said, Sergeant McCabe, there's a downed aircraft, we think, outside the east gate. So McCabe immediately calls our air traffic control, Tyre at Bentwaters. Said, do you have any reported downed aircraft? And they said, nothing in the area, nothing flying, it's been quiet all night. We were down for the holidays, we weren't flying. So he calls Eastern Radar, who, as Gary told you earlier, controls all the air traffic in the area. And they said, nothing. We don't have anything moving, no reports, nothing. They call even Heathrow Tower. And Heathrow says the only thing we show in the air are 2 tracks coming in from the States. In other words, 2 flights coming from the States. And they're over the English Channel. We don't show anything on our long-range radar at all. Nothing anywhere. So they scratch their head. And they say there's definitely down there. So they relay it to Central Security Control, who actually control the security police, not law enforcement. And they send up a security patrol. Sergeant Penniston, who's the senior NCO on Woodbridge Base. He comes up, and another officer comes up, Airman Cavanagh, and they verify there's something out there. So they call for their master sergeant that's a senior NCO on duty, J.D. Chandler, and J.D. comes up and they all look out there, there is something out there. So it's decided we're going to investigate. So Penniston and Burroughs and Cavanagh leave their weapons at the gate like they're supposed to and hop in a 6-pack 4-wheel drive truck. They drive out the East Gate Road to the Forest Service Road. They turn right as though they're going up to the Forest Service office if you're familiar with the road. They go up to what's now known as Track 8. In those days, there was no gate on Track 8. And Track 8 was not a road. It was just a muddy trail. And they had to have four-wheel drive to get down there, to be honest with you. They drive down the trail so far and turn into the forest on one of the small paths then. That's about as close as they could get to whatever it was. And they have a little problem. The radios are acting up. They're having problems. They can't communicate back. They crackle, and they're breaking up. So they leave Airman Kapanasak, by the way, who had only been on the base a few days and just gotten checked out. In fact, he was learning the base when it all happened. There as a radio relay so that he could relay back to the gate what was going on or to law enforcement or Central Security Control. Well, they proceed from there and they come up on an object, supposedly. Now, exactly what happened there's a multiple number of stories out there. The reason being, and I didn't learn most of the stuff until years later, other than what I actually observed personally, is before I got to them to debrief them, they were hypnotized and drugged. And well, I'm positive, screen memories, if you're familiar with that, were put in their mind and things were muddled a bit. So we're not really sure what happened. At that time, they told me that they didn't mention a craft. They saw lights and they saw something. It was structured, but they didn't describe it very much. They didn't talk about touching it. They didn't talk about all these things. They just said they saw something that was structured and they tried to follow it and it disappeared, went up at a high speed and went here and went there. But in fact, Burroughs only half remembers part of it now and he's been trying to get his memory back. But something significant happened and they did approach something. We know that there's a 45-minute gap in the time that we could communicate with them. And the interesting thing is both of them had digital watches and their watches were 45 minutes off when they came back to the base. So they came back to the base. And we were getting ready to send a search party out for them. And they described what happened. And, people had a little problem believing it all. But the master sergeant at the gate says, hey, there was something out there. We definitely saw something. Multicolored lights. We're not sure what it was. Anyhow, it's gone. Well, the cops are, rumors go around, everybody's talking. There's UFOs out there, there's this, there's that. Nobody was sure what it was. So I picked up the blotters. We'll go back to I picked up the blotters the morning of the 26th. I took them up to the office. And the base commander and I kind of had a chuckle. We were sure there was an explanation. There's something logical happened. They were responsible people, so we know they weren't lying. They wouldn't have come back with a lie like that. We had our morning stand-up. The stand-up was a meeting of all the senior colonels. We got together every morning, I think it was 7 o'clock, 7 or 7:30, and in the command post. We went over the day's activities and anything else that happened the previous day or so. And we talked about any visitors coming, the flying schedule, or what was appropriate. And everybody had seen the blotters, and we all kind of shrugged it off like, oh well, nothing of great significance. Well, the cops were going crazy about it, talking about it. All the cops were looking to the sky, watching the horizon, looking for UFOs. And it had me concerned. Now, 5 or 6 years later, after I'd been long gone from Bentwaters, I found out the next night, which would have been the night of the 26th, 25, 26, 26, 27, the on-duty lieutenant was Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin. Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin was fairly new. She was a young second lieutenant, and she had a tough row to hoe. Now keep in mind, in 1980, the cops were very macho. They had great difficulty accepting orders from a female. And she was black, which didn't help things any. And I kind of mentored her, and I would tend, when I hear cops say something about her, I'd shut them up and tell them, hey, she's your boss, work for her. She had some kind of an experience in the forest. I don't know. The best I can find out is she was airbacked out the next day for medical reasons. I do know that 2 of the cops had overheard her on the radio screaming for help. She apparently went out the gate and had some kind of an encounter. I don't know what it was. I've tried for years to get in touch with her. Recently, a friend of mine who's a good detective chased her down. She's in Alabama. So I wrote her a real nice long letter saying, I'll support you, and told her what happened to me. I said, if you want to talk discreetly to get some closure, let me help you. And I promise if you tell me and don't want me to tell anybody else, I'll never tell anybody else anything. I haven't heard back from her. At least the letter didn't come back, undeliverable. So I don't know what happened the second night. Go back to the third night, we talked about the party, having a party at the Woody Bar. Well, it was a nice affair. All 41 or 42 officers and their spouses or significant others came to the party at the Woody Bar. It was nice. We had a ham and a turkey, and everybody brought the dishes and desserts and whatnot. And we just finished dinner, and we're getting ready for dessert when Bruce England was a D-Flight commander, the lieutenant that ran D-Flight for the cops. He came in white as a sheet. Now, Bruce England wasn't a typical cop. Bruce England had been in the Marine Corps for 4 years. He was a tough guy. Got out of the Marine Corps, managed to finish his degree, and got commissioned in the Air Force. So he wasn't a typical second lieutenant. He was pretty mature. And he was a no-nonsense guy. Nobody fooled around with him. He came in and said, I was sitting next to Ted Conrad, the base commander, my wife and his wife, and a couple others sitting at the table. He said to me, I need to talk to you and the base commander privately, right now. And I could tell there was something funny going on. So Ted Conrad and I got up, and the only private place other than the bathroom in the club, that small building, was the coat room. Something like a small room over here. So the three of us went in there, and he said, it's back. And Conrad and I looked at each other. It's back? What's back? He said, the UFO is back. Oh, come on, Bruce. He said, no. He said, when we came on shift, we saw something out in the woods. And we went out there and looked. I said, you went off the base? He said, oh, we checked our weapons at the gate. Don't worry. He said, we took some Lidals out there, NF2 Lidals. It's a small motor generator with two big fluorescent lights on it. He said, we're having problems with the Lidals, but there's something out there. I said, you went off the base? So Carter and I discussed it, and he said, well, I've got to make the presentations and, give a few people a pat in the back and whatnot. So go put this thing to rest. So I went and talked to Mel Zickler, Major Zickler, who was the chief of security police. I said, who's your senior NCO on duty? He said, Master Sergeant Bobby Ball. Well, I knew Sergeant Ball. He was very competent. Great. I said, have him come by the house. I'm going home and change clothes. Have him pick me up, and we'll go take a look at this. So I said to Conrad, well, my wife's stuck here. If I take the car home, he said, don't worry, I'll take your wife home. Okay. I went to Sue Jones, Captain Sue Jones, who ran disaster preparedness. I said to her, who's on standby? They always had somebody on standby. She said, Monroe Nevels. Well, I knew Nevels because he and I had a lot of conversations. He was a professional photographer before he came in the Air Force. In fact, had a degree in photography. And he and I both had Nikon F2s and a whole lot of lenses. So we had something in common. I used to talk to him from time to time. He even had his own dark room. So I said, have Sergeant Nevels bring his camera and meet us in about 30 minutes or 45 minutes at the disaster preparedness office. So I went over to the office and picked up something, I don't remember what it was, went home, changed clothes and put on a utility uniform, not camis, we hadn't gone to camis, it was just an olive drab uniform and a big heavy field jacket. Because it was really windy and the temperature was right around freezing. It was just a cold, windy night, miserable night. Changed clothes, and Bobby Ball, Master Sergeant Ball came by with Bruce England, Lieutenant England driving, and there was another sergeant in the back. I didn't remember who he was at the time because it was dark and there was somebody in the back of the Jeep. It was just an open Jeep, the CJ5. So I climbed in and we went down to the disaster preparedness office. Now we had to wait a while for Monroe Nevels because apparently his wife was at a Catholic women's organizational meeting at the chapel and he was babysitting, so one of the cops went over to pick him up and he said, I can't leave till my wife comes home. So I think they went and picked his wife up and took her home. He showed up at the office and I said, Nevels, why don't you bring one of your Geiger counters along so we can show there's no radiation out there? Just as a thought. So it was a secondary thought. He said, okay, let me calibrate. I'll calibrate a couple. So he calibrated two and said, which one do I take? I said, it doesn't matter to me, either one. So he picked up one. We all powered in the Jeep. Well, by that time, Bruce England, who was driving, said, we're low on gas. So we went to the motor pool to get gas. We got to the motor pool. There were two cops with six passenger four-wheel drive trucks with Lidals behind them. And they were arguing with the fuel officer who was there trying to fuel the vehicles. They kept trying to tell him to put gas in, and he kept telling them they're full, it's overflowing. I remember saying to him, I said, come on, you guys, get with it. Well, they moved on, and we've got gas, and we went across the base, went out to the east gate, and I got out into the forest, and I about had a heart attack. here are 15 or 20 cops out there, 3 or 4 light-alls, they're milling around making noise. I said, oh my God, if we get caught out here in the forest with all this equipment in the middle of the night, it's going to be a public relations disaster. I said, it'll make the front page of the paper and we will be in trouble. So I said to the cops, all right, you guys, shut up, sit down, stay right here, don't move till we check this out. Well, Bruce England had brought a night vision scope, first generation one with him. We had them in the WSA for in case the fire ever went out. And they showed me looking through the forest, and there's an area in there that looked a little brighter, I guess is the best way to put it. If you ever look through the earlier versions, everything's a greenish, yellowish green. And they said, that's where the craft landed the first night. I said, what? I said, show me. So 5 of us went forward. Myself, Lieutenant England, Master Sergeant Ball, Sergeant Nevels, and Adrian Besenza, Staff Sergeant. I think he had been in a Jeep with us. Anyhow, he was there. So the 5 of us went forward, and the rest of the cops were ordered to stay back there. So we went out, and they showed me 3 indentations in the ground. They said, this is where we were brought and showed where Peniston, Burroughs, and Cabanas-Sac had an encounter in the forest. And so we measured the indentations, and we were doing this and doing that. Neville's got the gather counter out, the APN 27, and he's picking up readings. Nothing significant enough that, you would be worried about being injured or anything, but it was way above background radiation. It was hot in the indentations, higher, even higher in the center of where the 3 indentations were. And if we took the Geiger counter to the trees, the big Corsica pines, on the side toward the indentations, we got higher readings than we did on the back side. This was really impressive to me, and I was getting concerned. I said, something happened here, or there was something here. And while we're doing this, I think it was Bruce England looked out and said, there's something red glowing out there. And we looked out and beyond the farmer's field a bit, and there was a bright red, irregular shaped, glowing object. I said, what's that? First thing I thought, hey, we're seeing fall lightning. We watched it for a few minutes, and it moved into the field between us and the farmer's house. There's a farmer's house just across the field, and I'll show you a picture a little later. So we watched it for a few minutes, and it's out there glowing. It comes into the forest. It's moving through the trees, bobbing up and down, so it's obviously under intelligent control of some type. This is really puzzling. I'm getting nervous. We watch it for a couple minutes, and let's try and approach it. So we try and move up to the edge of the forest, which we did. There's a big berm there, and an old barbed wire fence at that time. Now there's a new fence. Apparently the farmer has problems with everybody intruding out there. We watch it moves out into the field, and it appears to be glowing, dripping, or sending off sparks or something's coming off it. It's not perfectly round. It's more oval and has somewhat of a dark center. Wow, this is really, I'm getting, why did they ever come out here? Nobody's going to ever believe this. We watch it for several minutes, and I get concerned really because the farmhouse directly across the way, now there's hedgerows and things there now, but you could see both the first floor and second floor windows in those days. And it's glowing so brightly it appears like the farmhouse is on fire. I'm a bit concerned for the people in the farmhouse, which is, other than that, dark. They've obviously gone to bed because this is somewhere after midnight. Suddenly, it's silently, no noise at all, just like fireworks, explodes into 5 white balls, and they're gone. I said, what? I said, let's go out in the field, take our torches, and see if we can find anything, because stuff was dripping or falling off it. There's got to be some evidence out there, some burn marks or whatever. So we go out into the field, and then we search. The only thing we found were cow pies, because somebody stepped in a couple of them. There's nothing been planted. The field was just a barren field with the cattle obviously been in it. I failed to mention that earlier when we first saw the objects, the cattle and all the farm animals were acting up something terrible. And when the object disappeared, they got quiet. So we're looking around there, and I think it was Neville's looked up to the north, and he says, look, there's multiple objects up there that are moving in synchronization together. They first appeared like a Cherokee moon, in other words, a half moon. But they have multicolored lights on them. I guess it's about 4,000 or 5,000 feet. So I called the command post, which I'd done several times, and I tell them, hey, look, we're seeing objects in the sky out here. call the radar people at Eastern Radar, RF Watersham, and see if they see anything. Ask our guys in the tower if they see anything. And they come back and say, no, nobody sees anything. Well, we learned later they did. We know a lot more now, but we didn't then. So I'm scratching my head. Well, there's something up there. We watched them for a little while. I said, let's move out past the farmhouse, see if we get a better view. So we moved on past the farmhouse. It's still quiet. We crossed the road. We water through a small creek and all get wet. And it's kind of unpleasant. It was really cold. Out into a plowed field on the other side. And we look up and we see two bright white objects to the south. Can't discern a shape, but they're certainly bright white objects and they're moving. And suddenly one of those objects, I'm guessing 2,000 or 3,000 feet high, comes directly overhead at very high speed, stops. We look up at it, and suddenly a beam comes down from it. Now the beam didn't radiate like an ordinary light. It was more like laser. It was somewhere, I don't remember the exact size, but it was like right there. We're looking at it probably 5-10 seconds, and I'm thinking, is this a weapon? Is this some kind of communication? Is this a warning? And then suddenly, you could see the dust particles in it. Suddenly, as it appeared, it disappeared. And the object moved back to the south. We're standing there in awe. I'm again calling the command post saying, hey, what's going on? You know, you guys see anything? Anybody see anything? No positive answer. We watch, and one or two of them go over Bentwater's base, and we can see similar beams coming down in or northern weapons storage area. I say that because we couldn't tell for sure, but we have 3 radios with us. I'm on the command net, which is to the command post. Bobby Ball was on law enforcement net, which goes to the desk sergeant. And there, Sergeant Bastenza was on the security net, which goes to Central Security Control, their nerve center. So I can hear the chatter on the security net of the cops in the weapons storage area saying they're seeing things. There's objects in the sky and stuff's coming down. Well, this is almost too much for me. But I can't get a raise out of the command post. You know, I think somebody should really be getting excited about this. Now people have said to me, well, why didn't you launch aircraft? That's not our job. A-10s are not interceptors. They're not capable. They're tank killers. We don't have any interceptors here on the base. And that's up to the command post to do that. That's not my job to launch airplanes. So we're out there till, I don't know, 3:30, 4 o'clock. It's on the tape, whatever time it was. It was almost getting light. And we're wet, tired, cold, hungry. And I said, let's pack it in and go back to the base. So we went back to the base. I need to mention one more thing. While we were out looking at the site where the 3 indentations were, Sergeant Burroughs shows up. Now, Sergeant Burroughs is one of the people that was involved the first night. He was off duty. He was on C flight. D flight was actually out there that night. And he calls me on the radio while we're there. He borrows a radio from one of the 15 cops or so that are back with the light-alls. And he calls me on the radio through Sergeant Bastenza and says, can I come forward? I said, no, you stay there till we come back. So when we came back before we went home, Burroughs was still there. And he said, may I go back to the landing site and have another look? I said, okay, if you do it quickly. It was about 100 yards away. So he and Sergeant Bastenza went over, and we could see them the whole time. And they came back and didn't say anything. Well, now he tells me that he and Bastenza had an encounter of some kind of a craft out there. I don't think so, but I can't rule it out because, I may have not been looking right at the right time and it may have happened momentarily. But he claims something came back then. I don't know. You're going to find there's a lot of things that are strange that I can't give you answers for, but I can give you some opinion on. So we go back to the base, and of course I go home. I can't sleep. I take a shower and have a bite to eat, and I decided Sunday morning I'm going to go in the office and do some things. So somewhere around 7 or 7:30, I go to the office. Now the office, we shared the building with the wing commander was one side and the base commander was on the other side, and we had a common entrance in the front. So if you went left in Union, you went into his office. You went right, you came into our office. Well, just as I unlock the door and go in, the wing commander pulls up in a staff car. He gets out, so I wait at the door to hold the door for him. And he comes up and says, that was some night you had last night. He obviously monitored all my radio calls. I said, sure was, boss. I said, I made a tape of some of the goings on. He said, what? You did? Come on in the office. So I went in the office with him. He said, play me the tape. So I played the tape, and wow, he said, and he asked me a few questions about the tape, and I answered them. He said, give me the tape. What? He said, yeah, I want the tape in the tape recorder. It was a little micro cassette recorder. I carried it all the time. It was easier than taking notes when I went around the base or had to do something or had to talk to somebody. So I gave him the tape recorder, and he said, I'm going to take it to the 3rd Air Force staff meeting on Wednesday. Every Wednesday morning, the 3rd Air Force Commander, General Baisley, had a staff meeting, and all the wing commanders in England went to the meeting, sort of like our meeting on the base in the morning. So I worried all week about it. And Wednesday, when he went to the meeting, I was at the door when he came back around noon. And the first thing I said, and I remember distinctly, I said, boss, do I still have a job? And he laughed. He threw me the tape recorder. I said, well, what happened? He says, come on in. So I went in the office, and he said, sit down. I sat down, and he said, I told the general what happened in front of the staff, what you said. He said, the general said, play the tape. I played the tape. He listened, everybody listened intently. He said, the general said to the staff, well, what do we do? Nobody had an answer. So the general, in his infinite wisdom, said, well, it happened off the base. It's a British affair. Case closed. Oh. So I said to Williams, well, what do I do? Anything? He said, no. He said, but when Don Moreland, our liaison officer, RF liaison officer, comes back, he'd been in Anglesey Island at his home for Christmas, get with him and see what he wants. So I waited about a week, and Don Moreland came back, and I went over and told him, and of course he got a bit shook up, and he didn't know what to do. He got on the phone and called his boss at 3rd Air Force. There was a liaison officer there. They called MOD, I don't know where, back and forth, back and forth. So a few days later he came over and said, write me a memo so I can talk from it. Okay, so I wrote him a memo, which now is the infamous memo. It was never intended to go anywhere except to him so he could talk to his bosses. Yes, no, it was not to go anywhere else, and it was not classified. Well, it was typed in our office. It was typed on a select typewriter. For those that are familiar with them, that was before we had word processors. The old typewriter with the little round elements, and you could change the element to get the font different. And we kept a carbon paper, but it disappeared. So years later, when people were looking for copies, including me, we didn't have a copy. It was interesting. I just wanted it to go away. Anyhow, Moreland went to the MOD, and he finally got some correspondence back, and I gave him the memo. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. I kept asking him. We have a cartoon in the States, a Beetle Bailey cartoon. I don't think it's over here, but there's a General Half-Track in there. Keeps going to the mailbox looking for something from the Pentagon and never comes. That's how I felt. But I was relieved, really. This is all going to go away, because this whole thing was not career-enhancing, believe me. In the Air Force, reporting the UFO is cause you problems. Nothing happens, great. 2 years later, it happens. What happened? During the time Mr. Warren, you've heard enough about Mr. Warren, gets involved. And Mr. Warren, I have to say, is a very bright, talented individual and the most convincing liar you'll probably ever run into. They probably ought to make a movie on his life. It would make good reading, all his nonsense and all the stuff he's done. But anyhow, he gets with Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. They're two authors and members of MUFON in the States. In fact, Larry Fawcett was a state director. And they talk about a book. So they get all excited because he tells them his wild tale about, little bubble men or whatever, and his craft and all this sort of stuff. So they come into the base with a Freedom of Information Act wanting my memo, because they apparently had heard somewhere there was a memo. So then Ted Conrad had gone and Jack Cochran was there, and he asked me, and I told the whole story. And so he wrote back and said, something happened in 1980, but we don't have any records. We didn't. It was honest. So they went to 3rd Air Force and asked them. Well, they didn't have a record either. But somebody in the RAF liaison office said, oh, we got a copy of that somewhere. So they gave a copy, or brought a copy out. The then 3rd Air Force commander was Pete Bent. And Pete Bent was a good personal friend of mine. So he called me up out of the blue and said, Chuck, we found a copy of your memo. He said, and we're going to release it. I said, burn it. He said, what? I said, burn it. If you release that, your life and mine will never be the same. I don't want the publicity. He said, oh, I have to. I'm going to. Well, he sent the memo back to the States. It got to Larry Fawcett, and he sent a copy to, I think, Jenny Randalls and Harry Harris, and maybe Brenda could shed some light on that. Anyhow, somebody in that group, and it hit the fan. I met BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, German TV, Japanese TV, Radio Orwell, people I'd never heard of from Germany and other places. They were all on my doorstep wanting the whole story. I had to go into hiding. I said, no way, no comment. I didn't want to be involved. Well, then there's the problem with the tape. I initially had the one tape, and Ted Conrad, who was my boss then, said, make me a copy. So I went into the conference room when nobody was in there, laid the 2 tape recorders down, because we didn't have any fancy electronic equipment then, and made him a copy of the tape. Well, he listened to it and threw it in the desk drawer. He moved on to another job and left it in the desk drawer. Sam Morgan came in. Sam Morgan was a new base commander, and he found the tape and played it. So he said to me, what's this? So I told him a story. Now, let me give you a little background on Sam Morgan. We had some issues. Sam Morgan had gone to undergraduate pilot training school with Gordon Williams. They were drinking buddies, flying buddies, whatever, back in the 60s. Morgan didn't have to start in a career. I mean, he did manage to make colonel. Williams was brilliant and was going places. In fact, Williams was being groomed as a potential chief of staff of the Air Force. I know that for a fact, having talked to 2 or 3 foreign generals. And Williams kind of looked out for him through the years. They had married 2 girlfriends that were friends, 2 airline hostesses that they met at the same time. Interesting. And while the boys went to Vietnam, the girls, the wives, became Playboy bunnies. How about that? Anyhow, so Morgan is brought to Bentwaters for a job. Morgan's being helped by Gordon Williams. And when Ted Conrad moved up, and he moved up because the vice wing commander got in a little trouble. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but that's hilarious. And Morgan came up as my boss. Before he came up, he told everybody he talked to, first thing I'm going to do is fire Halt. Well, the reason he wanted to fire me is because before he became base commander, his teenage son had gotten in a little trouble. He'd stolen the keys to the slot machines in the NCO club, and he also got caught shooting out windows on base with a BB gun. Well, when this all happened, the cops came to me and said, what do we do? He's the colonel's son. I said, you do what you normally do. So they went to the Morgan household to interview the kid, and of course Dad was there, and they wanted him present. And they told him, well, Halt said, we can interview your son. So Morgan and I didn't get along after that, and he wanted me gone. So when I heard he was going to fire me as soon as he came up, I started looking for a job. And I found a good job in Germany that suited me and suited them. And the 2-star in Germany called Dick Pascoe, who was then my new boss. He'd replaced Williams. And said, would you release Halt? I have a job for him in Germany. And Pascoe told him, hell no, because that's what he told me. I said, what? He said, and then he called me on the carpet and said, why are you looking for a job? I said, well, Sam Morgan's going to fire me. He said, I'll fire him first. Okay. So Morgan and I had a rather tense time for about 2 years till he left. Anyhow, he had my tape. He was taking it to cocktail parties and playing for people and ridiculing me. I didn't learn this till much later either. Somebody told somebody who told Harry Harris, a UFO buff from Manchester, a solicitor. And Harry got in touch with him, and he gave Harry a copy of the tape. Harry then turned around and sold the tape for a small sum to the Japanese, and suddenly it was everywhere. So my memo's out, my tape's out, and everybody above me backed off and disappeared, if you know what I mean. I was sort of out in the branch, and they all sawed it off and left me there. I could have lived with that if Warren hadn't come forward and started the book with Peter Robbins. But when he started the book with Peter Robbins and all that nonsense came out, I said, I've got to tell the truth, because they were using my memo, my name. I was out there. I was stuck. It's sort of like a tar baby, we say in the States. Once you touch it, you're stuck with it. It's yours. You bought it. So, there I am. What am I going to do? I didn't have much choice. Meantime, Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood contact me, the 2 writers in the States that had gotten the memo, and they said, would you be willing to work with us on a book? we're working with Larry Warren. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll agree to help you as long as you give me editorial control and you keep it to the truth. Stick to the truth. And they agreed, and I still have the agreement in writing. So we talked a bit, and about that time they discovered that Warren was a fraud. And he even actually admitted to Barry Greenwood that he had took Adrian Bastendis' story and ran with it. So we canceled that. So I backed off, and I didn't do a whole awful lot after that until things started getting hot with the book. The book became a bestseller, and I said, oh my God. So I started speaking out more. I haven't been doing too awful much. Let me get another paper here. I just want to make sure I cover everything, so. Okay. Well, we can go back. You know about the radar at Needham's Head, because you heard Barry Baker speak earlier. They also picked up something that the air traffic control people picked up something and saw it drop off the radar into the forest. And I'm going to read you some things our air traffic controllers at Bentwaters saw it too, and I'm going to read you an excerpt from them. Kind of funny story. Keith Beebe, who was the lead writer and reporter for Noise of the World, popped in. I got a call from the gate. The gate sergeant said, Keith Beebe's out at the gate. He wants to talk to you. He wants your bio and your picture. And I said, what? I said, let him in, but hold him up for about 15 minutes. Well, public affairs office was just across the street from us, so I ran over there and pulled my bio and picture out of the file. Figured he would want my picture. So Keith came in and we talked a little bit, and he ran over to public affairs to get my picture. He couldn't find my picture, so he took Gordon Wing's picture and it appeared in the paper. I'll show you a copy of that in a few minutes too. So I was embarrassed that they got my boss's picture. If I'd have known they were going to do that, I'd have taken his file too. From Bentwaters, I went to Oklahoma for a year, and that's a long story, and then to Korea as the base commander at Kunsan. And then I went back to work for the DODIG. In that capacity, I was a senior officer in the DODIG. I worked for Mr. Cheney, who was then Secretary of Defense. We looked at everything. I had total inspection oversight of all services, all agencies, NSA, DIA, all those agencies. In fact, we did organizational inspection of two of those agencies, NSA and DIA. When we did the NSA inspection, just prior to the inspection, Larry Warren called me. And he said, I'm going to the Washington Post. I'm going to make a big story that NSA is holding my medical records. I said, oh, I didn't give much of a comment. So I talked to my team chief, who was going to the NSA, because I'd already been out done the in-briefing, but the team was getting ready to go out and do the actual inspection. So I said to Lieutenant Colonel Shea, who was heading up the team, I said, Bill, when you get out there, you tell your counterpart there's a kook by the name of Larry Warren who's about to go to the paper. If they're holding his medical records, they better plan on what they're going to say. He said, okay. So he went out there about 8:30 in the morning, Fort Meade. I got a call about 10 o'clock from Ben Levitt. He said, I'm from NSA. I said, oh. He says, I run the compromise branch. I said, oh, why are you calling me? He said, what's this about Larry Warren? He says, well, you say there's going to be something. So he and I talked for a while. He kept pushing me for answers, and I poked at him, and it didn't take me long to realize he knew as much about Larry Warren as I did. So it was kind of a standoff. But Warren never got his thing in the paper. I guess the Washington Post ignored him. So good for them. I was approached about the same time by Unsolved Mysteries. I don't know if any of you, did that ever show over here? I don't know. Anyhow, it turned out to be the highest rated ranking program they ever did. But anyhow, they approached me to do a program. I was still on active duty. So I said, I don't think I can do that. So I went to my boss, the DODIG, and said, hey Derek, I'm supposed to do this program. What do you think? So I sat down for about an hour with him and walked him through everything I knew. And he said, do it. I said, okay. So I did the program. And I have to tell you, that's probably one of the few that was pretty accurate. Every other program I've done, they've embellished things, left things out, taken things out of context, and it's kind of frustrating. I've gotten to the point now where I say I want editorial control, or at least I'm say so, and to see it before you release any program. So I've turned down a lot of offers for movies and different things. I just don't want the nonsense out there. There's already enough stuff. Warren's already done enough damage. There was mention about an underground facility. There is no underground facility at Bentwaters. There's 2 or 3 buildings that have small sort of bay basements, and there's a good possibility several years later that the 1 fighter squadron office over on the far side of the base, they may have put a small room downstairs to put some vaults with classified stuff in. But I can assure you there is no underground facility at Bentwaters. There just isn't. That's a non-starter. That's all part of the nonsense that Warren put out. That I'm convinced Adrian Bastenza was given a screen memory that was part of it, disinformation. The more I learn, the more I find out, the more I realize there's black fingerprints. By black, I mean spook fingerprints all over everything. They've been involved from day one. And I'm going to show you I'm going to go to some slides here in just a minute, and I'm going to go through them with you. We're going to talk about a whole lot of sightings before and after. I'll give you about 4 or 5 examples. I have 20 or 30 very similar occurrences. One particular case, and I don't have all the documents with me, but the police in the weapons storage area actually opened fire on a UFO with no results, of course. This is just a shot of the base. Gil Tabor came in after Gordon Williams. That's the new wing headquarters. Our building was actually in an old beat-up old Quonset hut. It was almost embarrassing when we had visitors. Here's one of the papers from News of the World. You can see there, no hoax says air chief. I don't even think they even talked to him. But they put his picture in the paper. And he got a great deal of torment from the 3- and 4-star generals after he got promoted. There's another one. Invaded from space, and there's Lord Hill Norton. I'm going to, if we have time, play a little segment from him. Air traffic control tower at Bentwaters, World War II era, it's still there. It was adequate for what we did. There's the control tower at Woodbridge. Interesting story. My older son graduated from high school, at Woodbridge High School on the base, went back to States. I wanted to send him to college, and he didn't want to go. He said, I've been in school long enough. He went in the Air Force and became an air traffic controller. Well, by that time, I was a senior colonel and in a good position. I called the personnel center and said he'd like to go to Bentwaters. He went back to Bentwaters for his whole 4 years, and he ran the tower at Woodbridge. That's what he did the whole time he was there. And he would occasionally tell me, he said, we still see strange things sometimes. And we also pick up the SR-71 when it drops down to 80,000 feet. With our height fender only reaches so high. This is the road looking back at the east gate. You can see the revetments in the background. That's been improved since 1980. This is a new gate. This is not the original gate that was there in 1980, although it's somewhat similar. And this fancy guard shack that's there wasn't there. There was just a little thing, like I say, about this big with a telephone and a little stand in it and a folding chair. This is taken about 3 or 4 years ago, looking down the East Gate Road. Now the whole area here, this was all low scrub, about that high. It was, you could see all the way out through the pines, almost to the coast. That's Jim Pennis and I standing on the road out there about 5 or 6 years ago. This is pretty much what it looked like all the way out to the road, and even beyond a ways. That's looking back at the gate. This is Forest Service Road 8. Where they come out the gate, up the road to the right, and turn down here. This was taken fairly recently. There's another shot of the Forest Service thing. This sign was right there at that gate. It's gone now. I don't know where it went. It was there 4 or 5 years ago. That's looking in the forest. This is the trail. It was the trail then they went down, and they went over into the forest over here. The farmer's house is out beyond there. The Norford Nest Lighthouse is way out here. This is somewhat like the forest floor looked like, not the trees, the floor. There was low pines and whatnot, or low ferns. Here's a copy of the plaster cast. Now let me tell you the story. Here is one of the 3 original plaster casts that were made of the indentations in the ground. Now let me tell you how this came about. Jim Peniston went home very upset from the first night, very concerned, almost in shock, and knew nobody was going to believe him. He was firmly convinced. So he lived in Ipswich in a rental unit, and his landlord had a next door neighbor who was a plasterer. So he talked to his landlord, and they went over to the neighbor, and the neighbor gave him 5 or 10 pounds of plaster of Paris and a big bag of water and a bucket. So Jim Peniston went back out the following morning, before I was even out there, and made plaster casts of the 3 indentations. And he numbered them and dated them. And this one says number 2, and it says, I'm having trouble reading it now, it's getting rubbed off almost. I think it says the 27th of December, 1980. There were 3 of these. He hid them in his backyard, back garden as you call it, buried them in a big plastic bag, because he was afraid someone would try and get them. He wasn't far wrong. He dug them up before he left, and he gave one to me, just in case something happened. He put his in a box and sealed it. Now when you move, just let me put this back. When you move in the military, you get commercial mover. What they do is you put all your belongings, or they do, in a small box. They inventory them, they number them and label them. That small box goes in a big box. Then the big box goes in a big shipping crate. It's a big wooden shipping crate. The shipping crate is nailed closed. It's caulked and sealed to make it waterproof. It never gets opened supposedly until it gets at the other end and they open it at your new house or wherever you're living. Well, Jim shipped it back, and it didn't get there for almost 6 months. Normally it takes about 30 to 60, 45 days, maybe a little more. And they kept putting tracers on it, trying to find it, and trying to find it, and trying to find it. Finally, it shows up almost a year later. When they open the crate and open a small box, guess what? The plaster cast is gone. Now try and explain that. Now why would anybody go to all that kind of trouble? It just baffles me. I mean, is it that important? I don't think so. So I've kind of kept that out of sight myself. So that is one of the authentic plaster casts to give you an idea how big the indentations were. They were not perfectly round. They were more egg-shaped. But that's definitely one. Now some people have said, well, you've gone to the wrong site, you've done this and done that, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I took somebody back 2 or 3 days after it happened, a British friend of mine, and I took a sample in one of the old Kodak cassettes. The 35 millimeter film comes in the little canisters, the little black canisters. I took a sample and he took a big sample. He had his analyzed right away, and he came back to me and says, you guys made that. I know how you made that. You used plaster of Paris. I said, no. Guess what? That shows me that I was at the site where Jim made the plaster cast. It verified it. And I had mine tested years later, and guess what? I was at the right site, because a lot of people say it was here, the landing, it was there, it was over here, it was up there. That's where they took me the first night. That's all I know, and that's where Jim made the plaster cast. I was back at that site 4 times with Jim Peniston and twice with Burroughs, and they all but the last time took me to that same general place, because the forest had been denuded and there had been all kinds of changes, but they took me to the same general area. Now they're saying the site where it landed was way over there or over here or whatever. Well, I can tell you, I know where I went the first night, and I'll show you on the map. Here's a picture of the weapons storage area. You see the tire there in the background? We had a very sophisticated alarm system on the fences in the ground and whatnot. I mean, you could not approach the gate or the fence or touch the fence or go between the fences without setting off alarms. The primary alarm was in central security control, and the controller up in the tower up there had an alternate location, so if something happened to the power or the other system, you could continue to operate and watch what was going on. The guys up there, I'm going to read about what they saw in a few minutes. Here's a better shot of the tower. You can't go up there now because nobody's maintained it. It's too dangerous because the rusty steps are not really secure. I was up there a few years ago, but they don't want anybody going up there now. Another shot of it. There's to give you an idea what the fences were like. 10 or 12 foot chain link fences with razor tape on top, sensors on the fence, sensors in the ground, sensors on the other fence. The only way to get in there is either drop in by chopper, and we had a contingency plan for that, or ram it with a big, like a tank or a big heavy vehicle, come right through the fences. In other words, come in there. You could have gotten in there, but you wouldn't have gotten back out. So that's basically what I'm saying. Okay. Bentwater Space, Woodbridge Base. Here's the East Gate here. Here's the East Gate Road. So the cops would have come out here, and we did go there, go down here, over in here, and parked in here, and there's where the object was seen. There and out in the field. There's the farmer's house. So you get a good idea. Now some people have said, well, the landing site was over here, it was over there, it was out here. All I can say is, there is where I've been consistently taken, and that's where I'm firmly convinced is the right spot. I think that model they have is down here somewhere. I don't even bother with it. The Forest Service has turned it into a commercial thing, and I can't blame them. They're overwhelmed with people coming out there, so what they've started doing is having programs, and you pay to go and whatnot. So this is a shot inside the weapons storage area, the shelters. They're hardened steel and concrete shelters with earthen embankments over top of them. We had a real problem there with rabbits. We actually had to hire a gamekeeper with a pellet rifle to come in because the rabbits just literally made the ground look like Swiss cheese. They just continually burrowed and bored. We were standing back here somewhere. There's the farmer's house. Now, as I said, there's a row of windows there, and there's another row down here, and there was no hedges here. The lighthouse is over here in this notch in the hill. And let's talk about the lighthouse for a minute. I met the lighthouse keeper, Keith Simmons, and his wife Marlena. He and I had a couple drinks, and we talked for a long time. He looked me up. I said, Keith, tell me about the lighthouse. He said, well, it's unmanned. It's all automated. He said, I just have to go up there every so often and do this, clean the lens, or whatever the normal maintenance should do. He said, the lighthouse has 3 lenses, red, green, and clear. He said, clear or white shines to land. Red and green are navigational lights to shine to sea. Because people said it's a lighthouse. Well, the red light from the lighthouse is not visible from land, only from sea. He said there's no way they could have seen that. Besides, most of the time we were out there, depending upon where we were up and down, we could see the lighthouse. I knew where the lighthouse was. I'm very familiar with Orford. There's 2 real nice, or there used to be nice pubs out there, and I'd take visitors out there to eat because the food was good and the price was right. Or I'd take them up to the keep at the castle there, and people like to walk on the beach, and it's a nice, quaint little town. So I'm very familiar, and all the cops are familiar with the lighthouse. They all knew because they could see it all the time from different places on the base. Now, the lighthouse is not as intent. I think they've changed the wattage or something. It's not as bright as it used to be. But you can still see it from time to time, although somebody told me they're going to decommission it soon. I don't know, but regardless. Here's another picture of me standing about where we were when we were up at the fence looking at the object out into the field. There's just a picture of the lighthouse. I don't know how many people are familiar with what went on in Orford Nest. Orford Nest is a very interesting place. Now it's a wildlife refuge or whatever now, and there's a couple of BBC tires out there. But back in the 40s and 50s, a whole lot of classified things happened out there. Triggers for nuclear weapons were tested, and a whole lot of other things, and I'm not even sure what was going on. We had some very classified things at one time, Cobra Mist and whatnot out there, monitoring Russia and different things. But that's all been removed or abandoned. I know that. John Burroughs has said, well, they were sending radio waves and sending this in 1980. I said, nope, that all ended in 1978. And I'll show you something else. Guess what? That's a good book. It's one of your local people wrote. He actually wrote a couple of books. And he gives you the whole history of the place, although he doesn't go into the classified stuff. And he'll tell you right there in the book, in 1978, it all shut down. This is the castle at Bodzia. You may be familiar with it. During World War II, the British government confiscated it, I guess. We call it eminent domain. And they used that to house the officers for World War II and experimental radar stations. Now some people have said, well, the reason UFOs are around here is because of Bodsey and all those radio waves we sent up back in 1945 or whenever. I don't think so, but it's just something interesting. There's another book that Gordon did about Bodsey. Just to the north, and I think you all know this, is Sizewell B. Are you aware that they get multiple sightings of UFOs every month? Sometimes as many as 30? I bet you didn't know that. Bodsey Village, supposedly the home of British witchcraft, is just up the road. I don't think that ties in either, but I've had people tell me, well, that has something to do with witchcraft. Although I firmly believe that a lot of the paranormal stuff that people experience may have some tie-in somehow or other, including Bigfoot, to UFOs. I can't say that for a fact, but I just have a suspicion. There's another shot of Bodsey Village. There's the memo. And I think I told you earlier, when I wanted a copy, I had to go on the internet to get it because we only had the carbon manifold and it went missing somewhere through the years, so I didn't even have a copy myself. Here's something very interesting. I don't know if you can read that. Even if you can, I can tell you about it. On this line right here, it says, all the Air Force units are required to make a history report every month, and it's cataloged and done by year. Then it's stored at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Everybody. Every unit has a historian, believe it or not. Well, I went to Maxwell Air Force Base to get the history of the 81st Attack Fighter Wing for the period from December to January, in other words, December 1980 to January 81. And guess what they come back and told me? You can't have it. It's secret. Does that tell you something? Here's some of the stuff Warren claimed. We don't need to deal on that much. I will say one thing. He said Gordon Williams drove out there. I know he didn't drive out there. We're going to talk about him in a few minutes. He couldn't have driven out there because he couldn't have taken a staff car, which was a Crown Victoria, a large American four-door sedan. He wouldn't have gotten 100 feet and had been towed back out. He also, even if he'd gotten down the road, he'd had to go over a berm, which would take an tracked vehicle and through a barbed wire fence. And he didn't come out in uniform, and he didn't have Don Moreland with him, like it was said. Don Moreland was in Wales. Here's a letter from Walter Andrus, who was the MUFON director. They did a voice stress analysis of Mr. Warren, and guess what it says? He failed. I have all the police reports. You don't need to read them all. They basically say the only time we came out was after the first night, and we said, well, those indentations look like hens burrowing, rabbits burrowing, or hens nesting, and they left. The night I was out there, the PCs were called, but there was a Otley post office was broken into, and that was more important. You've seen some of the stuff on Bastenza. This is Steve LePlume. This was one of his drinking drug buddies. I will say one thing. Mr. Warren only served one night on duty with the police as an officer. He was decertified for PRP. PRP means Personal Reliability Program. You could be decertified for anything from taking a decongestant to a behavioral problem. Well, his wasn't a decongestion, I can tell you. He was under observation for his personal habits, I guess is the best way to put it. He was put on what was called the chain gang. I think he's made mention of it a couple of places. The chain gang was something that we never should have done. I didn't do it. I objected. But the chief of police had a few druggies, so what he did, he called them the chain gang and had them walking along the road, picking up moving rocks off the road and cleaning toilets and doing stuff like that. He was on that gang for a while, but apparently what happened, as best I can piece together, the spooks got involved and said, because Warren had been making a lot of noise about UFOs and all, and they wanted him gone. So he was his clearance was taken away, PRP taken away, and he was put in the supply office, stacking stuff on the shelves and stuff for a while till they could figure out how to get rid of him. And they got rid of him, who knows what, I think for his elbow, who knows. But they got rid of him rather than court-martial him because they didn't want the publicity, I'm firmly convinced. I talked to the judge advocate and he didn't want to talk about it. Now Sasha showed you his discharge papers earlier and had stamped under Gordon Williams' name, the wing commander. Gordon Williams never stamped things. He signed them. I know that. I knew him well. I knew his exec. In fact, his exec was visiting me this past spring, and we talked about it again. He said Gordon didn't even have a signed stamp. He did not. He signed everything. He was that kind of a guy. Another forgery, that's all. This is the guy that was the original whistleblower. He responded to Brendan. Brendan can tell you more about this. Can you read that? I'll read it if you can't. Basically, Brenda wrote to him and says, is Rendlesham UFO fact or fiction? His answer, fact. Was Colonel Halt involved? Yes, he was on scene. His story is true. Was Larry Warren involved? Never heard of Larry Warren. Wasn't in the cops when I was. Well, he was only on duty one night. Was Burroughs and Pennison involved? Burroughs and Pennison were there. Were there nukes involved? There may or may not have been at Bentwaters at the time. There was no active storage facilities at Woodbridge in the late 70s and 80s. No cover-up at all. Colonel Holt's original story, as outlined in his letter, happened. Other legends just grew out of that incident and are just that. Original things happened were strange enough, in my opinion. This is from J.D. Ingalls, who was the guy that put out the original whistleblower. Here's an interesting thing. This guy shows up. Actually, it's Chris Green's his name. Dr. Green. Dr. Green's a medical doctor that the OSI put through medical school, and he also had a PhD. His specialty was remote viewing and UFOs. He showed up at Bentwaters, according to two of the people that saw him and were interviewed or debriefed, a day or so after the incident. The UFO advisor to the White House was at Bentwaters. I didn't know it. He also got the President's Intelligent Medal for a work on a classified project from 1979 to 1993. Also considered as a UFO cleanup doctor. Now, another interesting thing happened. John Burroughs was making noise and trying to get his medical records. And for good reason, he has some health problems, which may or may not be related. In fact, I wrote a real nice big letter to the Veterans Administration to try and help him get medical help, because he has a heart problem, some other issues. Could be related. Well, he was making a lot of noise, and he appeared at the National Press Club with an attorney and made a lot of noise. And Chris Green found out about Dr. Green. Dr. Green contacted him, and he helped him get medical help too, as well as Gordon Williams wrote a letter to. But the interesting thing Chris Green told John Burroughs, he said, I tried to get your medical records. He said they wouldn't give them to me. He said, that's only happened to me twice because I have clearance to get to anything. He said, I tried to get yours. They wouldn't give them to me. Two other people I tried to get them. Kennedy, after he was assassinated, they wouldn't give them to me. And I tried to get Hitler's. They wouldn't give them to me. So, good grief. I find that most interesting. He claimed he got out for an eye problem. He went to Lakenheath for an eye problem. We had an eye doctor on the base, a very good one, Lester Sharpton. He was a good guy. I went skiing with him a couple of times. If he had an eye problem, a burned retina or whatever, it was from taking drugs and looking at the sun. But he never went to Lester Sharpton. I talked to Lester Sharpton. He never saw him. And as you see earlier, where that Eccles, that's an orthopedic doctor. There was an orthopedic doctor. A friend of mine found the former NCOIC of the eye clinic at Lakenheath, who was there at that time frame, and said, did you ever treat a Larry Warren from Bentwaters that had a burned retina? He said, I never had anybody from Bentwaters with a burned retina. They wouldn't have even come here. They would have been taken care of at Bentwaters. Oh, you've seen that already. Oh, this is about his fraudulent, supposedly, degree. The school says, guess what? Never heard of him. Here's a picture you've already seen. This is the MUFON. Most of you know who that is. This is their chief photo video analysis. He went over some of the stuff that Larry Warren did. It says, good forgery, but it's a forgery. Sacha didn't talk about this, Operation Bullpen. I don't know, you probably never heard of it. It was the largest sting operation the FBI ever conducted. Sports memorabilia. I didn't realize that's almost $1 billion enterprise. Big money. You know, some outfielder's glove, the ball from this game, the helmet from that, the shoes from something. People pay a fortune for that stuff. Well, there's an organized crime ring, and guess who was involved with it before he came back to England? He was hanging around with a guy by the name of Stan the Man Marino. When it hit the fan there and they started arresting all these guys, that's when Larry came to England. Now, was that the main reason? I don't know, but it's kind of coincidental because when he was such a little fish, they probably didn't come after him. But he was learning the trade. This is from Peter. You know about Peter. Peter has sent me a profuse apology and he asked me not to make it public. But because I've been telling him for 25 years, Peter, you're on a dying horse, get off. It's wrong. And he finally admitted it. If you look, there's two paintings here. The one The yellow one is Warren's painting. The one on the left is Bud Hopkins' painting. He was making counterfeit paintings and going to sell them to Peter Robbins. I showed these to Peter Robbins and he went crazy. Here's another one he duplicated, one Warren's versus the original. He was a good painter. Here's the photo. This is funny. Warren has given this picture as his buddies to the people making Capitol Green movie. Guess what? David found it on a cop website. It's Upper Hayford, 1980. It's not Bentwaters. Because we showed this to a couple of the cops and they said, those aren't our people. We don't recognize anybody. So that'll appear in the movie probably as his buddies. Gordon Williams passed away in last November. Unfortunately. He and I kept in touch through the years, by the way. We were good friends after he retired. Unfortunately, he came down with cancer and passed away right around Thanksgiving. On his deathbed, 2 emails were sent, I think to Sasha's, I remember. This is by his son. In other words, Dad has something on his deathbed he wants to get off his chest. So they shared these with me. Okay. So I found the son and the daughter. Actually, there's another daughter who didn't even come to the funeral, but the family was very dysfunctional. Let's leave it at that. So I kept bugging his daughter, Susan, to tell me what he said. And this started in, March or April, and it went on for months and months and months. Finally, after 4 months of back and forth, she kept giving me excuses. She agreed to meet him in Washington, D.C. at some little bar with her brother. So I showed up. Now my wife was with me because we were going, my son's a senior in college and he's getting kicked off campus because there's no rooms. He has to go get a place. We found an apartment and we had to go sign the lease as co-signer. So she was with me. So we meet them at the bar and there's Susan in there half drunk, noon on Sunday. And Art says, well, before we talk, I want you to sign this 5-page disclosure statement. I said, what? So I read it and it said, in other words, I couldn't reveal to anybody anything they told me at that meeting, as far as what their dad said. Well, I thought I was really going to get something juicy that I couldn't tell you, but at least I would know personally. And I said, and they kept beating around the bush and telling me how they didn't get along with their dad and had family problems. I said, no, let's talk about the UFO. What'd your dad say? Well, I can't tell you exactly the 2 words she told me, but it said so many words, keep on. Those are my words, not her words. Because I agreed not to tell what those 2 words were. But that's basically what it means. I said, you're kidding me. Well, what's the rest of it? That's it. What do you mean? Well, I've gone back and forth with them a couple of times, and they refuse to say any more. So, her dad dies. I feel badly. Park Sims, who was the wing executive officer at Bentwaters for like 8 or 9 years, he worked directly for the wing commander. He was the administrative guy that wrote all the speeches and did all the paperwork and everything. That's how I know that Williams didn't have a stamp that said signed. Sent me an email and said, Gordon Williams they're going to have a funeral for Gordon Williams and a remembrance service. Are you going? I said, nobody's invited me. Of course not. They don't want me there. I went back and said, no, I haven't been invited. He said, well, I'm thinking about coming, but that's an awful lot of money to come over there and stay in a hotel and taxis and everything else. I said, Park, because we were good friends. I said, Park, I'll tell you what. You fly over, I'll pick you up at the airport, you come stay with me, we'll take care of you, don't worry about food, transportation, or anything. All you have to do is come. And he said, well, I want to visit some friends. I said, I'll take you to visit your friends. He said, great. So Park flew over. This was March. And I picked him up at the airport, and he came down the house. We talked about old times for a long time, and mutual friends, and who's doing what, the small talk. And he said, are you going to go to the funeral? I said, I don't think I'm welcome. I told him what happened. He says, BS. He said, between you and Williams, you want to remember him? You felt you will enjoy him? He was probably one of the best guys I ever worked for. He said, go. So he and I went to the funeral. Well, I'm telling you, talk about being an outcast somewhere. Wow. But anyhow, I stayed back low-key and went around, and there was Marge Williams, his ex-wife. They apparently got divorced a few years back. And she'd been a pain in the butt for me when I was at Bentwater. She was always asking for things that we couldn't do or whatever, unreasonable things. And I realized later after talking to her that there was a very dysfunctional family. She was unhappy, very stressed and whatnot. So anyhow, we talked for a long time, and she confirmed a lot of things to me. The night I was in the forest, Gordon Williams couldn't have been out there. They were having a small dinner party with a British couple in their home. She said around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, 2 cops showed up at the door. I said, what did they say? She said, well, I didn't hear what they said, but they told Gordon something was going on. And he made a phone call. I think the phone call was made to Al Brown, his golfing partner, the major in the Air Force. I think so. Al Brown showed up in the air traffic control tower while I was in the forest. I verified that with both the controllers. Now, Gordon Williams knew a lot in the background. He kept it at a distance, though, because he did not want his name associated with it. None of the senior people wanted, including me, wanted their name associated with it. All right, let's talk a little bit, and I'm going to read you some. How much time do we have? A few more minutes? Where's David? Well, let me read you a couple things. My name is Staff Sergeant Randy D. He left his last name out because he doesn't want his name, and I promised him I wouldn't say it. Here's my story. It was Christmas time, Can you hear me? What's the matter? Just keep it kind of. Okay. It was Christmas time, 1980, we were working the 311 shift. C shift had just been working. I heard from the guys on C shift they've been seeing a lot of stuff in UFOs in the woods and so forth, and all hush, hush, hush. Then he goes, I'm going to skip a lot of it. I also remember some of the guys in C-Flight volunteered to come on duty during our time to investigate something. We thought they were all whacked or crazy. Anyhow, it was clear and quiet. I believe I was working Whiskey 5, which is the alarm response team in a weapons storage area. Clarence George was my supervisor. Rick Bobo was the tower operator, the guy up in the tower. Next thing I recall, not long after shift began, perhaps midnight or so, I heard Bobby Ball come over the radio and request the aircraft control tower give him permission to cross the active runway. Very unusual. I did it a few times. And then he was accompanied by Bruce Lincoln, and they picked up Lieutenant Colonel Halt. They then proceeded across the runway, and he talks about us going out in the forest. He said, suddenly I said, the guys up in the tower are seeing funny things. I asked, what's everybody looking at? And they pointed to 3 objects that appeared like stars with the naked eye. Again, the bright white lights. I saw very clear images of 3 triangular craft that were hovering a few miles away above the treetop. There was no doubt in my mind these were UFOs. They were triangular in shape, larger than a jet fighter, but smaller than a C-5. Definitely triangular with lights arranged around the bottom that were different colors. I was unable to distinguish the exact color because of the distance. I stayed in the tower for an hour or 2, and I heard one of the guys turn on the binoculars say, wow, it just took off. 2 of the craft left at high speed. The remaining one was still in position when I left the tower. Then he goes on talking about it wasn't the lighthouse, I've seen the lighthouse, etc. I'm going to skip through some of the words that aren't important because I want to be able to get to all the stuff. This is Jim Carey. At the time I was an air traffic controller. At the time I was a tech sergeant and air traffic controller with the 2164th Communications Squadron. The other controller was named Ike Barker, and a major named Al Brown was also there. I think the incident happened somewhere around 12 o'clock. I remember Ike and I worked till then. It was during the holidays. I remember seeing a very fast object on the radar we had in the tower. The scope was variable. It had a zoom and a far display range between 5 and 60 miles. I think it was set at 60 miles when the object appeared. It came from the east, went straight west across the scope, disappeared to the left side, maybe 4 sweeps. Each sweep was 2 or 3 seconds, so it covered the whole 120-mile scope in multiple seconds. In 15 years in air traffic controller, I never seen anything travel across the scope that fast. A few seconds later, it came back on the scope, retracing its course to the east at the same speed. Then I think maybe 3/4 of the way across, it did immediate right turn, headed south off the bottom of the screen. I mean, it just turned instantly. We couldn't believe it. We kept saying to ourselves, this is not one of ours. He said, I distinctly remember all that. And then his partner says, well, he basically says the same thing. He was the master sergeant. He said, but then he went on, he told me, I interviewed these guys and talked with them. And Robert Hastings has them on a film that's on the YouTube, I think. I said, why didn't you guys tell me the night I was out there? It would have made all the difference in the world. You gotta be kidding me. Everybody we know in the air traffic control business has reported a UFO has been decertified and became a cook, a baker, a mechanic, or some other thing. He said, you can't do that. I said, I understand. So we left it at that. This is another individual. I was a senior airman in the 21st 64th Communication Squadron. I was a radio relay repairman. On the first night, Christmas night, if I'm not mistaken, I was in the weapons storage area working on a piece of equipment in the security tower, the tall tower, the alternate place for the sensors. They were having trouble, and we were working on the issue. It was a motion control detection component used for the security of weapons. The guy who was there to relieve me was coming on duty. He called and said he'd come to the area, so I went back to the wideband radio shop, back to his office, and finished up some work. He said later he called me and said, hey, we just saw a UFO. He met himself and the security guards. He was in the tower at the time. He sounded just matter of fact. I said, what did it look like? He said it was so bright you couldn't see, look directly at it. So I didn't get any details, how large it was, but it was really bright. He said it was hovering there for a few seconds. It went over to a wood bridge and dropped into the woods. That's where we were. So I asked him, did everybody see it? He said, everyone had. I said, well, are they going to report it? Are they going to report it? No, they're not going to say anything. I said, well, what are you going to do if the others report it? He said, are you going to be on your own? He said, yeah, I guess so. I won't say anything. Okay. 2 nights later, the part for the equipment came in. It had to be ordered. We got notified just as I was coming on shift. So he said he'd go out and install it. I stayed at the Radio Shack. Then somewhere around 12:30, he had to pick up the part, and he called me very excited and said, he'd just seen another UFO. It had followed the runway, which runs more or less to east and west. It turned, then it turned again. It flew directly over the weapons storage area. Then it came right to the tower. It was so low, he said, that the guard hit the deck. He said it hovered nearby for a few seconds. He couldn't say how long. Then it slowly moved over the trees. He said it was just like before. He called me on the landline. He said he heard a bunch of chatter on the radio. Next time I saw him, he told me he had to file a report along with the security police at the headquarters. It was, maybe 300 yards from the weapons storage area. That would have been Central Security Control. Later on, like it was a week or so later, he'd been called into our squadron by the commander, Major Costa, and told to report for a briefing. He was gone most of the afternoon. When he came back, he was really agitated. I said, what's up? He said, we're not to speak about it. Then he said, real angry, I know what I saw. He said, the OSI's involved. I can't talk about it. At the time of the incident, I was a sergeant assigned to the 81st Security Police Squadron, RF Bentwaters Woodbridge. I worked for both law enforcement and security, both C flight and D flight. I was assigned as a SAT team, Strategic Alert Team. In other words, to respond. Our mission was to protect the base, flight line infrastructure, aircraft personnel, etc., etc. Incident happened about 7:30 p.m. on June 28, 1972. This is an earlier one. I got a whole bunch of these. We were on patrol in the tactical aircraft parking area, and they just returned. One of the airmen had been assigned a duty station in front of the aircraft, and it was parked. I suddenly received a call on the radio from Central Security Control, advising me that alarms were going off in the weapons storage area. As indicated in the alarm panel, the person called was very excited. I remember the message was garbled, and the radio had some static because it asked Morton if he got all the transmissions. I immediately swung the vehicle toward the weapons storage area and turned on my blue lights. As we got close to the area, I could see a cigar-shaped object hovering over one of the bunkers. It looked to be 200 or 300 feet in length. We drove even closer. It looked more circular or more saucer-shaped. Also visible was a reddish-colored beam that extended downward from the bottom of the craft toward the ground. The saucer was grayish and aluminum in color and almost one piece. I didn't see any seams, rivets, or angles. It almost looked like it could have come out of a vacuum mold. It was smooth. We got closer. I saw another object that was apparently hovering behind the aircraft we were looking at. It moved to the left of the first one. Then it took off at a high rate of speed straight up. I didn't hear any noise, any engines, at which time it didn't make any sense because when our F-4s took off, you could hear them, believe me. Then he goes talking about the aircraft actually chased them. I think you've heard enough. I probably received about maybe 15 or 20 reports starting from about 1972 up until we closed the base. that strange things happened and strange aerial objects were observed continuously. And I think I told you earlier, on one occasion, the cops in the weapons storage area emptied automatic weapons at it to no effect. So, what do we have? I understand there's still activity today there. I don't know because I'm not there, but it's certainly a strange place and it's an eerie place to be at night, I can say that. I think I've covered most of what I wanted to get to. I probably have some more. I've got a lot more I could talk about personalities and issues that went on and things that relate to it, but I think you've heard the gist of it, and I'd like to leave some time for y'all to ask some questions because I'll answer them as best I can. But before we do, I want to say some things that are important to me. The more I learn, the more I realize that just about everybody that's been involved has been meddled with one way or another. When I did the debriefing of the guys, it wasn't a big thing really. After the first night, the 3 guys and everybody that was involved, I took their word for it that what they gave me was accurate. I found out now that they were all debriefed and told what they could say to me. In fact, a couple of them were given statements to bring with them to me. I thought they typed them. I realize now because they were typed by somebody else. Because Airman Cabanasac can't type. He wouldn't have typed it up. So, anybody tells you anything about an incident, I think you heard that earlier, ask a lot of questions. Don't believe half what you say. I'm not saying people are lying. There's a whole lot of people that want to be. We've got a lot of them that have come on scene. Last November or December, my adult daughter called me and said, "You're not going to believe this. I was out at an outdoor store in Manassas, Virginia, buying camping gear." And she said to the clerk at the cash register, "Do you all give discounts for military people?" Now my daughter was a professional musician and she'd been in the Army band in Washington, and retired. So she said, "Yes." Good. She said, and the store manager was standing right there. And he said, "Were you in the military?" She said, "Yes." He said, "What branch?" She said, "The Air Force." She said, "I was in the Army, but my dad was in the Air Force." He said, "I was in the Air Force." She said, "Oh, where were you stationed?" "Well, my first station was RAF Bentwaters, 1979 to 1982. She said, "Wow, maybe you know my dad." He said, "What's your dad's name?" She said, "Halt." She said, "Oh, Colonel Halt." He said to her, "You know, I was out in the forest the night he went out chasing UFOs." I said, "What?" So she called me and gave me his name. His name's Westhoff. And he and I have talked a couple of times since then. He's a real straight guy. And he said, "Wow." I said, "Well, what do you remember?" He said, "I was really frustrated." He said, "They left 2 of us at the gate to guard all the weapons. So we were stuck there. And we could hear all the stuff on the security net. And we could see the UFO. We saw the glowing object. We watched it. And we wanted to come out, but we couldn't because we were stuck there." So wow. Well, I'd earlier heard from somebody else, another supposed cop, which turned out to be true, who had contacted, I believe, Sasha or somebody, and she passed it back to me, or maybe David. And I talked with him, and he told me basically the same story. Only he told me he had an M60 machine gun with ammunition, chambered rounds. Well, I know that part's not true, because we never took M60s out with ammunition unless it were a real, live, world thing. In other words, a threat to the base. We did take the weapon out occasionally for exercises, but we never took the ammunition. We didn't run the risk of anybody doing anything. So, I'm not really sure of the story, but I do know he was there because his partner verified. They both verified each other were there. And the only reason he came forward after all these years is the security police have a website and a thing for security police and whatnot, and he went on there. So you can trace old friends from 1979 or 1985 or whatever. And he saw some names on there that he recognized, so he called them up, and then some of them asked him, "Hey, have you getting involved in this UFO stuff?" And that's how I found him. So 2 more witnesses have come forward and confirmed, what happened. So how many people saw the incident that night? The number is somewhere between, my guess is about 75, maybe more. I know of at least 3 British couples that saw something the same night in the same area, and they've come forward. So there's no doubt something happened. What it is, I have no idea. I'd love to have an answer. I do know that the spooks are definitely involved. I know there's the disinformation campaign. There's interest at very high levels. Unfortunately, most of the people at high level don't let it be known that they have an interest in UFOs. Not too long ago, my good friend Leslie Keene, who wrote a very good book, UFOs, Generals, and whatever, contacted me and said, would you be willing to brief some high-level people in Washington? And I said, sure. So she set up a thing, and I went in, and I didn't know how many senators or congressmen were there, but do you know who the main guy was? John Podesta. You know who John Podesta is? John Podesta was Bill Clinton's chief of staff, and he ran Hillary's campaign. He's the guy that had all his emails leaked, unfortunately. But he has a burning interest in UFOs, I can tell you, as does Clinton. So, in fact, Bill Clinton, when he went into office, and this is public knowledge, said to Warren Hubble, who was his chief of staff, Warren Hubble later got in a lot of trouble personally, but anyhow, he said, Warren, I want to know two things. Who killed Kennedy, and are UFOs real? He never got an answer. So,
just keep going. We'll have a little Q&A after.
Okay. Is he going to take that mic?
While he's doing that, we could just say the fellow with the M60, he's having downloads now, isn't he? That's a new one.
Oh yeah, I didn't mention the cop that claimed he had an M60 is now claiming that he's getting downloads of binary code. I suppose tonight, if I have a dream, I'll probably have a binary code.
Something people were saying 3 years ago.
Yeah, well, people were asking me about the binary code. I think Jim Pennison really believes that. I have to tell you, the incident derailed both their personal life and their military career for all three of the people that were involved the first night. Pennison ended up in a divorce. He's had issues with other women. He's had issues, all kinds of personal things. I spent countless hours with him in the command post because he was an up-and-coming NCO that everybody trusted. In other words, to be with the senior officers when there was a lot of pressure, and did a very good job. But he's never been the same since it happened. I've been with him multiple times on different things. I've seen the book and held the notebook. I never saw any code, but I wasn't looking for a code. So, I looked at the pictures and the hieroglyphics and the craft in his notes. But I'm firmly convinced he believes that. So what I say to people is I have problems with that, but he believes it, so what can I say? He's written a book, and the book is not very complimentary to me or anybody else, and there's a lot of disinformation. There is a lot of good stuff in it, but he has me working for a staff sergeant that's marginally competent and a bunch of other things, so I'm very frustrated with it, but whatever he wants to do, he can do. The only thing I know about the UFO and the WSA is it overflew the WSA at a high altitude, 3,000 or 4,000 feet. I saw beams, but keep in mind, I'm a mile or more away and there were a lot of trees in between, so I really don't know what happened there. I had to rely, the only reason I ever said that I saw, or there were beams in or near, is because I could hear the radio chatter on the security net because Sergeant Costanza had that on all the time. So all the cops heard that were on the security net. My only interface with the NSA was the organizational inspection we did and the call I got from Ben Levitt about Warren's medical records. And when we did the inspection of the NSA, we were only allowed in administrative areas. You have to understand, even the director of the NSA doesn't know a fraction of what goes on in that organization. It's all compartmentalized. The few doors we did get open, every time you opened the door, there were 3 more doors, and you never got past the first one. So I can't tell you anything about the NSA. I was there. I did the debrief. I met the general and talked with him, and I realized talking with him, he was more of an administrator is the best way to put it. So the spooks play their own game, let me tell you. You had no idea what all goes on. I know a little bit of it, but not much about them. Keep in mind, I just wanted this to go away. I was kept in the dark as far as who was sneaking around the base. Some of the cops told me that an unmarked C-130 came in a day or two later with a team. I wasn't aware of that. I generally knew what was going on. The cops told me that, but if they hadn't told me that, I would never have known. And I can't confirm that. I never saw anything out of the ordinary. I did go to the OSI commander, Chuck Matthews, who was a personal friend of mine, and we socialized. A day or two after I ran into him, I said, Chuck, do you guys have any interest in this? He says, no, we don't deal with anything with UFOs. Are you kidding? I believed him. I trusted him. Then I found out all the debriefing took place in their building. Now, their guys didn't do the debriefing according to the people that were debriefed. Naval Intelligence out of the embassy was involved. An M agency from Great Britain was involved. And probably Dr. Green. I suspect if there were drugs administered, I suspect the doctor administered them, but I don't know that for a fact. I didn't learn all of this stuff till later. I keep learning more stuff all the time. And I've learned so many people have been meddled with so much that I don't know what to believe myself anymore, to be honest with you. It's really frustrating. If you're looking for me for answers, I don't have them. All I can do is tell you what I know and what I think. And I've pretty much done that, I think. But if you want to read a really good book that's well documented, and the guy's straight, boy, he's something else. Robert Hastings wrote a book, UFOs and Nukes. It's scary. All the stuff. He's got all these people that have retired that have come forward after they retired and talked to him, and you have the names, dates, places, everything in there. He's done a lot of research. In fact, he's spoken 400 or 500 times all over the world. So if you're really interested in that kind of thing. Do I think that whatever was there was looking for whatever we had there? I don't know. Maybe. Because incidents started before and after we had what we had there. So stuff keeps going on there. Now, does that mean they weren't interested? I don't know. I can't answer. People have said certain things were taken back to Albuquerque, New Mexico to be tested. I wasn't aware of that. I don't know. It's a tough thing. The problem is there's too many wannabes and too much nonsense out there. To try and sort it all out is almost impossible. John and I are going to try again for a follow-on book, but I don't know how successful we'll be. We're going to try. Because we've learned an awful lot since we published the first book. So, there's an astronomer called Ian Redpath. Maybe you've heard of him. He's a critic. He and I have gone round and round, but he has a closed mind, so you can't rational deal with him. Yeah, I could see the lighthouse. I know the lighthouse. I've been there. What can I say? If it were just one beam of light and it was in the forest, maybe they have a case. But take in mind, stuff's in the sky here, stuff's in the sky there, stuff's over here. Guys are seeing triangular objects in the sky. The air traffic controllers see it on their scope and see it visually, personally. So, a lighthouse? No way. It's frustrating, but what can I do about it? Everybody's entitled to an opinion. So, and like I say, if they're willing to debate, I'll debate them. But a closed mind, there's no sense talking to them. It's like dealing with a drunk. Been there.
There we are. That was Colonel Charles Halt, recorded September the 8th, 2019, at Woodbridge Community Centre, Suffolk. Hope you all enjoyed that and found it interesting. Now, to follow up with that is a very recent interview, just taken just a few days ago. He's found out a few new things since that conference, so sit back and I hope you enjoy this talk with Colonel Halt. Hello, Chuck.
How you doing?
Oh, all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How about Joe and the dogs?
Yeah, we're fine. Thanks, Chuck. Nice to speak to you again. Haven't seen you this year, obviously, because of all the problems. But anyway, yeah. I mean, now, 40 years. How does it feel?
Well, not much different, to be honest with you. I've said so many things, but there's a lot of things I've held back because, I guess before I get started, I should say, I was frustrated in a lot of ways because I didn't know at the time and didn't know 2 years later that what all happened to Jim and John and Herman Cabanesac and to Bonnie Tamplin and to probably Bobby Ball and Lord knows how many other people that they were screwed with something terrible. In fact, what was happened to them was criminal in my opinion. It's probably best I didn't know at the time because I'd probably ruined my career by speaking up rather loud, I guess. But what can I say?
Yeah, obviously. I know when we did the conference, you did mention a bit about some of that, but you've obviously got more information as well now. So,
I put a lot of things together, and I had then, but I've basically said, the only people that really knew what happened the first night are the ones that debriefed by drugs and hypnosis the parties involved.
Sure.
Trust me.
Yeah.
I'll let you draw your own conclusions, but I have enough information that there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I guess I suppose the first thing we should go into is how do you feel about Jim's book now? I mean, it had just come out when obviously when you were over here when you did the Woodbridge conference, and you did sort of spend a couple of hours or a couple of days going through it, and you felt it wasn't very complimentary to you. Do you still feel that way?
Definitely, even more so. The more I learn about it, I realize that how should I say, Mr. Olson has taken advantage of Jim and has him under his wing, so to speak.
Right. Oh, Gary Osborne, yeah. Is that what you mean?
Gary Osborne, excuse me, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's face it. Many of the quotes, and he did a lot of quotes, are taken out of context. And the ones that he could use that really conflict with Jim's story, they're ignored.
Right.
I mean, he spent so much time maligning John Burroughs and I that it just, everybody that knows anything about the incident and reads the book and says, this is rubbish.
Yeah, I know it's a very it's a very detailed book. Obviously, it's got lots of who said what when and everything, but you feel a lot of it's been taken out of context. I mean, I don't know what
I'm going to write up. John and I are doing a follow up to our book. Actually, it's John's doing most of the work. I'm just providing the material.
Yeah, this is John Hanson.
There's a lot of interesting things.
This is John Hanson, not John Burroughs.
Yeah, John Hanson. For instance, they didn't put my memo in the book. Now, there's one of the key documents. It's not in the book. Look.
Yeah, that's the
General
point.
General Williams wrote a letter supporting them getting VA medical benefits. I wrote an unbelievably long letter to the Veterans Administration, which both the boys got a copy of. You know, it's not in the book, but Williams's did. The question is why.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So, have you got anything?
Yeah, the book says I joined the Air Force to get close to UFOs.
Yeah.
I think I've told you.
Yeah,
the
you
reason
have.
I joined the Air Force is to avoid the draft. I was about to be drafted into the Army.
I mean, you did say that you had no interest really in UFOs, although you'd picked up a book.
I had none whatsoever. I mentioned, I said this, that when I was 13, 14 years old, I did read a book, but I put the book aside and never given another thought.
As we all did back then. I mean, we all picked books up when we were younger.
Oh, well, I was an avid reader, so what can I say?
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in the book, like it says, Ted Conrad's wife was a lieutenant colonel and she was director of personnel. That's ridiculous. She was how shall I say, retiring, would not get involved in anything, but she stayed in the background and really controlled Ted.
So
it was embarrassing to the point. For instance, it's in our book. I went down and had tea with Princess Anne. You know why I went? Because Conrad's wife refused to go, and Jackie Arrington, who was the community relations advisor, said somebody from the base has to go down in uniform and meet her because we were sponsoring the orphanage. There's a lot of other stuff in there.
Yeah. I mean, is there any specifics that? I mean, have you spoken to Jim at all since the?
After the book, I sent him a detailed, which will appear in the book, our new book, thing outlining my problems, and he came back and says, well, that's everybody's perspective. Well, he took Neville's. There's an interesting person.
Yeah.
Monroe Neville's. We're talking about someone who was, what can I say, a definite loser. Everybody that had any dealings with him had issues. I mean, the guy drove through entry control points on exercises. He drove into restricted area and almost got shot. One night he drove into his neighbor, Master Sergeant Buckhoff's house, put his car all the way up to the windshield in his son's bedroom. Fortunately, the kid's bed was on the other side of the room. Everything he touched, and now he was technically qualified, just stupid and did dumb things all the time. What happened when he left Bentwaters, and I didn't know this, Captain Sue Jones, who was his boss and a very competent person, wrote him a referral APR. That's his annual evaluation. A referral APR is the first step to getting booted out of the Air Force.
Oh, right.
After he left Bentwaters and I left Bentwaters, he contacted me and says, would you help me appeal it? And I said, to be very honest with you, it was probably deserved. So that leads to what he did in the book.
Right.
In fact, the stuff he put in the book is only part of. Jim told me that some of the stuff he sent was so nasty and so personal that he didn't dare put it in the book for fear of being sued.
Right.
I can tell you a lot about Neville's. I mean, he was really a trip. And I can take apart everything he says in the book. For instance, he says that when they came, he and Bruce England came to the Whittick bar to pick me up. He was with them. He couldn't have been. He was at home babysitting his daughter because his wife was a Catholic women's program at the chapel. We had to wait for him. The cops had to go fetch him and fetch his wife. Then he says he came to the club and met the maitre d' at the door. Well, the Woody Bar is not a big club. There is no maitre d'. Believe me, it's just a one big building with a small cloakroom and bathrooms on the side. The bar's even in the main room.
Right. I must admit, I can't imagine there being a maitre d' at the door, to be honest. You know, being on a base.
Then he says he came in and sat at a table in a side room with all a group of officers making plans for equipment. There is no side room.
Right.
And then when he says, "Do I mind if I can come along?" Well, anybody that knows me and knows the military hierarchy, that didn't happen. Gosh. Then he says I was already in the forest when he went out. Well, how could I have gotten in the forest? I was at the club with Bruce England. They came by and picked me up at the house. We stopped for fuel. And the guy at the fuel station remembers me by name because I got after him because he was playing around servicing light-alls that didn't need any fuel. And there was a big argument going on between he and the cops. Tony Briscoe's his name. And he says, I remember Colonel Hawk because he got a little sharp with me. I did. Then he says my call sign was Bravo Charlie 2. My call sign was Stopper.
Right.
And on and on and on. Then he said, I ordered light-alls out there. I didn't order any light-alls. I was shocked that they were there.
Right.
So all of Neville's testimony is just BS.
So who would have ordered the light-alls?
Jim knows that. Jim knows that.
Right.
But now, whenever David was here, remember the other David? Dave and Julie? You know them?
Yeah.
And John, they were here visiting last year?
Sure, yep.
Okay, we were sitting at the dining room table, and David's there going online. He's on Facebook. I'm not. I don't play games with Facebook. I don't even deal with it. He says, you need to read this. Heather Olson, who is Jim's wife, put a 3-page epistle up there bragging about her abilities as a professor and how students love her or whatever loves her and all this and that, and on about how her husband. 2/3 of the way down the 3rd page, it says, and we are going to destroy the other Rendlesham Force witnesses. Can you believe that?
Oh, I must admit, I never read that at all. But
I can tell you, and David will vouch for it and say, well, John, and my wife, we read it, and I said, I don't believe this.
Oh, I don't doubt it, yeah.
That really shocked me that Jim would let them even put that in the book.
Yeah.
And put that online. Then I went back a few days later to print a copy, and guess what? It was gone.
Right, yeah. I wonder why that would be.
You draw your own conclusion. Let's talk about the first night, though. That's very interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, 3 people went out in the woods. We know definitely there was something seen, multiple color lights, because there were enough witnesses to that were probably never messed with, if you know what I mean. Everybody from Master Sergeant Chandler to 3 or 4 other cops, and the whole gang of them were up at the east gate looking out and saw whatever it was. All they could see was multicolored lights. It looked like a downed aircraft. 3 people we know went out. That's definite. Burroughs, Peniston, and Cabanasac. Of the 3, only one ever said, and this was years later, that he got close to the craft. All the early testimony and all the early comments, especially when they came back from the field, said, we got close, but every time we got near it, it moved away. So, and Burroughs said, I never saw a notebook when they were out there. Now, put yourself out there in the field in the middle of the night, very dark, strange place, something very shocking, I guess is the best way to put it. You've got a radio in your hand, you've got a camera in your hand, you've got a notebook in your hand, you've got a flashlight in your hand, and you're making notes and doing things. It's kind of hard to do, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
I'm not saying it didn't happen.
Yeah. I can see you'll be juggling things about a bit, yeah.
Yeah. And when the cops finish their shift, the security people, they're all collected by various different vehicles and taken back to Central Security Control to turn in their weapons, because that's where the armory is. From there, they board a Bluebird bus, which is nothing but a big blue school bus, and they're taken back to the dorm where they get their car or go to the dorm or wherever they live. On the way back from the CSC, Peniston sat next to somebody. Guess what? Richard Bernalino. Bernalino says he asked Jim, well, what was going on? I heard all that radio chatter. And this is well documented.
Yeah.
Jim pulls out an empty notebook and draws a triangular craft for him. How about that?
Yeah.
Now, what happened to that drawing, or where did the other drawings come from? There's nothing else in the notebook at that time. The notebook never appears again until back in somewhere around 1997. Jim suddenly has a notebook and talking to Sally Rao. So then in 2003, we did a program called UFO Invasion at Rendlesham, and it's on YouTube. You can go look it up and watch it.
Yeah.
Jim and I, my wife actually came with us. Jim Millio from MPH Productions did a program for Sci-Fi Channel. And so we gather, and by the way, before that, Jim and I have been back 3 or 4 times, and we've always gone to the same original site, the same place I had been taken to the first night, which was not far from the field and across from the farmer's house.
Yeah.
I think you've been there.
Yeah, the one where you took us to it. We all went to it, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, when I was out that night, I took a soil sample, and a British friend 3 days or 4 days later, I took a sample, and he came back to me and said, I find calcium carbonate in my sample. I said, yes, you should have probably, because that's where Jim made the plaster casts. And if you look at Georgina Bruni's book, there's pictures in there of Ray Gullius, Master Sergeant Gullius, Captain Verano, and 2 British policemen at that same site. So pretty much validates that was where the original incident supposedly happened.
Yeah. Which is not where the UFO monument is for anyone that's been to the woods.
Well, we'll go there in a few minutes. That's the Forest Service there. Lord knows what they did. Okay, so we do the program in 2003. We're all up at the gate, at the east gate. And by the way, they replaced the gate with a better gate. It looks similar, but it's more substantial and more modern.
Yeah.
And also the guard shack that John Burroughs went to make the phone call back to CSC and to law enforcement has been replaced. It's a little more elaborate now, but it's about the same place. We're at the gate talking about everything, and so Jim Millio says, well, let's go to the site. So we start down the East Gate Road. We go about, I don't know, a couple hundred feet, and Jim says, let's turn right here. I said, right here? Where are we going? He said, to the landing site. I said, Jim, so I just scratch my head and I go along with it. So we go down parallel to the fence, about 200, 300 yards, and Jim says, this is where it was. I said, Jim, this is not where I've been taken all these years. This is not where I was the night I went out in the forest. What's going on? He said, I know this is the site. He said, see these trees? These are the trees that were there then. Well, Vince Thurkettle's with us then. Do you know who Vince Thurkettle is?
Yeah, yeah.
He's the forester who lived in the forest and was on duty the night we were in the forest, although he wasn't involved.
No.
Vince is there, and Vince says, Jim, these trees are only 20 years old. These trees couldn't have been here then. There's no answer. That's on the video. Go watch it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's on there. At least my statement to him is this is not where we've been every other time we've been here. So
yeah, you would know as I say, you'd know where you've been before. So
approximately within 50 or 100 feet. So then I read the book, Rendlesham, Revelation or whatever it is.
Enigma. Rendlesham Enigma.
And there's a third site now. So what the devil's going on? We've got 3 different sites, and the Forest Service has another site. This is getting interesting. Can you explain it? I can't.
No. Well, if you can't, I can't.
Well, there's more. There's more. In October 1980, first of all, in 1983 in the summer, my memo got released over my objection.
Yeah.
So it was out there, and everybody had a copy, and my unfortunate tape got out too about the same time. So Brenda Butler and Jenny Randalls and Dot Street wrote the book Sky Crash.
Yeah.
They were working on the book at that time. Brenda gets a call from Jim Peniston, but he doesn't say he's Peniston. He uses an AKA, James Archer, and says, I need to set you straight on what happened that night. And Brenda said, who was this? He says, James Archer, I was out there. She said, okay, can we meet? So they agree to meet at Bentwaters. And she says, how do I know you? He said, don't worry. I know who you are and I know your car. Interesting, isn't it?
Mm.
So they meet in a lay-by, which is a parking lot in America, on the base. And they're not allowed to do a tape. Just Brenda and Dot came. And they took copious notes. And Jim described what happened. He said it happened on the 27th of December. That's the date in my memo, not the date it happened. It happened the 26th. And she said, oh. Then he goes on to say some other things. He tells her they never got close enough to it. John tried to get near it and it moved away. I have her original notes. She sent them to me.
So I mean that confusion about the 27th and the 26th is, I suppose, because it was the night of the 26th and it went into the 27th, early hours of the morning. Is that?
No. The original occurrence happened the night of 25-26, Christmas night, morning of the 26th.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
So it has the date wrong.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Now,
yeah, so
if you go back and look at UFO at Invasion at Rendlesham on the YouTube, you'll see the notebook. Now it's hard to see, but he has the date the 27th there in the notebook. So when I asked him about that date, he said, "Oh, the 27th was the date of a flight exercise." So I said, "Well, Jim, how could that be? You were sent on break for 3 or 4 days after the 26th. You were not here on the base on the 27th.
Right.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting also, the symbols in the book look very much like the beam shown by Jesse Marcel from Roswell. Also, the original statements aren't probably worth anything because they were done after the fact, after they were debriefed and hypnotized and drugged.
Yeah. Did somebody else?
It's interesting.
Did somebody else write those?
Somebody else did the statements or helped them with statements. In fact, Cabanas' statement was typed. He can't type. He didn't even. That's ridiculous, and it uses terms that are more British than American in a couple places in the statement. Read it carefully.
Right.
So there's a whole lot more. 2 different investigators have gone back and talked to Jim's wife, his original wife, Maria. Jim said originally that he came home, went home on the morning of the 27th, and sat down at the kitchen table and wrote the code. And his wife was there. Maria says, "No way, didn't happen. I don't believe in the code." Also, there's a young lady he calls, what's the name he used? Amy Wilkes. You know who that is, don't you?
Oh, yeah, I know who that is. We won't say her real name.
I'd rather not protect her, use her name.
No.
But
I think anyone that knows most of this story will know who it is. Yeah.
Okay, so Jim and John did a program, the 30th anniversary, and I think you may have been there, were you? With Peter Robbins?
Yes.
Woodbridge Hall?
Yeah.
But in fact, they got into it with Peter Robbins pretty significantly.
Yeah. I mean, obviously,
I understand. It was a big blow up. I understand.
Apparently, yeah. I think there was a
Amy Wilkes or whatever her name is shows up there, and develops a relationship with Jim. They become more than friends, should I say. Jim goes back to the States, and she follows soon thereafter, and they end up living together, and she's working with him. In fact, she introduced him to Mr. Olson.
Yeah.
She says, "I helped him write code and decode it."
Right. Because he does describe quite a lot about how that relationship sort of develops, and that he invited her over, or she kind of invited herself over, and then she kind of outwore her welcome. I
guess so. Now, keep in mind that's how should I say, a spurned woman, but nonetheless, she does have something to say, and she sent me a lot of correspondence after which I didn't even know anything about her. It was unsolicited, if you know what I mean.
Right.
She was very frustrated and upset.
Yeah.
And vented some of it to me, and I have all those emails. They're very interesting to read. The relationship there, there's obviously some real problems there.
Yeah.
Especially on Jim's part, and probably she contributed to them. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot more like that. I have a whole lot. I'm going to put all this down in writing. Jim's going to go crazy, I know, but I'm sorry. It's the truth. Like he told me, if the truth hurts, too bad.
Yeah. Is this all going to go in the second book? Is it? Do you think?
Or... I'm going to write a special segment in the second book.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose fair is fair. I mean, you're both obviously got your own opinions of what.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm just going to state facts. Here's what happened when. Here's what I know happened. Here's what somebody has told me. what I'm saying, and I've always, in the last few years, always said nobody knows really what happened the first night except the people that debriefed them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I have great problems with the code.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you do actually look at the descriptions that were actually made out, it doesn't say anything about a craft having landed. It was like lights being seen and trying to chase after them, wasn't it? Much like your night, really, wasn't it? It was, nothing landed at Capel Green. There were lights up in the sky, or it came down reasonably low.
I saw an object that hovered above the ground, a red glowing or orangish red glowing object, about the size of a basketball or a little larger. And I did not see a physical craft. In no way. I did not see any entities. I did not see anything, that I could say, this is what exactly the shape, size, or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, there were people in the WSA with binoculars that claimed that the objects we saw in the sky were triangular. 2 or 3 different people, including a call man who was working in the WSA tower, claimed he saw the equivalent of sparks or something coming off the large craft they saw in the sky.
Hmm. And these I didn't. These are like metallic droppings, weren't they, apparently?
Yeah. Well, the object we saw in the field, the glowing object, something was dripping or coming off its sparks or dripping, dropping metal or something. I don't know what it was. That's why we went out in the field looking.
Hmm. They say when Kit Green made a visit to the base, apparently.
I didn't see him. I didn't know that, but I was told by several people that were involved that he was on the base.
Right. So you didn't have any...
I don't know that for a fact.
No, you didn't have any dealings with him directly. No.
No, Gordon Williams admitted to James Fox that the special team came from Germany in a C-130. We do know there were a couple planes came in soon thereafter, and a lot of the cops said there were people out in the forest with special suits on.
Hmm.
I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah.
I do know on Gordon Williams' deathbed he made a statement to get something off his chest about the truth of the incident. He told his daughter, who told his son, and wants $10,000 to tell the story. So it must be significant in his mind.
Hmm. But you don't actually know what that is.
I don't.
No.
I met with them. They were supposed to tell me. I signed a non-disclosure statement, and then all they told me was 2 words.
Yeah.
It was just encouragement to keep on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I remember you saying that you'd heard from the family, and that they did seem to want to tell you what was going on, and then suddenly everything went quiet, didn't it?
Yes, like they were either frightened or decided to make some money off it.
Yeah, which I suppose you can understand from that, from that perspective, I guess. If you start thinking about it, a lot of people have made some money out of the story.
I certainly have. I've lost money.
Oh no, I know. Yeah, I didn't mean you.
I haven't made a nickel. John has not sent me a check for 1 penny for the book.
Yeah, no, I know you haven't made it.
I have not complained because I only did the book to get the truth out.
Yeah.
I didn't do it to make money.
No. I think the one that made the most money was the book that got removed for the proven lies in it, wasn't it? Left at Eastgate.
Oh yeah, Peter Robbins made a lot of money off, and he shared it with Larry.
Yeah, but that was probably the one that made most money, and of course that wore itself out anyway. And of course, in between, since then, that book a couple of years ago was removed from sale by the publishers because of the proven lies in it, which you've been.
Oh, I know.
Which you've been stating for years.
I have a very detailed apology from Peter Robbins over the book and what it did and how it was done. And it ruined his career, but what can I say? But I have been warning him for 20 years that, hey, you're riding a dead horse, to get off.
Yeah, it did affect him quite badly, I think, actually. I think he was on the point of a breakdown himself, from what I gather, over it all. And but
well, he certainly screwed up enough people.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Yeah. Well, obviously, since then, also we've had a few other books. We've had recently Nick Redfern's book, saying that the whole thing was.
Oh, I have a couple. I haven't read Nick's book, but I read the summary, and all I can say to Nick is that Jacques Foulet went through this years ago in his book Revelations, and I wrote him a nasty letter, and he and I met and had a long conversation, and he admitted after I explained everything to him, because he just took his stuff from other sources, he says, I agree with you, it was not a mind control experience. And he said, with 50 people observing, and including the air traffic controllers, people in the WSA, people in different locations in the forest, people at the East Gate, 2 or 3 independent British civilians all corroborating, plus what happened to the British controllers at, was it Needle's Head? Needle's Head?
Neater's Head, yeah. Neater's Head.
Neater's Head, yeah.
Neater's Head, yeah. Yes.
So,
a weird...
Here's something very interesting that Georgina sent me some notes before she died when she was working on the book. She and I went back and forth many times. She found the man that was running the comm center at Martlesham Heath. Now, Martlesham Heath is located about 4 or 5 miles down the road from Bentwaters.
Yep.
It was a comm center and a highly classified listening post. But all our communications, militarily-wise, teletype and telephone out of on, went through there. Now, do you understand how the military system worked in 1980? We had a manual switchboard, where the operators sit on a chair with a headset and pull out cords and stick them in holes.
I've seen them. We've all seen them in films.
That's what we had in 1980. It was kind of dated, but we hadn't updated it yet. And the military system, if you use the military Audubon phone, there are different levels of priority. You start off with a routine call, a priority call, an immediate call, a flash call, a flash override call. Now, the whole time I was deputy base and base commander there and in Korea and in the DODIG, I never used anything above a priority call. He said the switchboard, starting the night of the first incident for about 3 or 4 days, lit up. They couldn't even control the traffic. Everything was immediate flash or flash override. That stuff's reserved for a nuclear attack. He said we were swamped. It's totally swamped. Interesting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So you would say that was definitely not a military exercise of any kind?
We had exercises all the time. We never used anything above a priority call. Maybe if there was something significant went wrong, the time that they had an A-10 fire off a round and hit the WSA and they did an up channel and everything, there was probably an immediate call to say, hey, this is not real. This was an accident.
Yeah.
Other than that, we did not use those priorities. They were reserved for a nuclear attack or a nuclear incident.
And also, we've got John Burroughs has just brought a book out with James Worrow, which I haven't read yet, or haven't even seen it around yet. But obviously, that goes down the route, as I understand it, of some sort of exercise. And I think it's based on the Condign report, is it?
Oh, John runs hither and yon. John's John. What can I say? You know him.
Yeah, I know. Well, I did hear him a little while ago say that he thought it could have been time travelers from the future. It was on the... He
can say all kinds of things. He's told me I'm an OSI agent. He told me I've had multiple tapes. He's told me I know more than I'm saying.
Yeah.
I've been told to shut up. And he's told me I've got all those emails. You can't believe the stuff he sent me. Yeah, the Congress report talks about all the stuff that happened on Orford Nest. Well, that all ended, 2 or 3 years before the incident happened in the late 70s.
Yeah, well, the Cobra Mist stuff, you mean?
Yeah, all the Cobra Mist stuff. No, that went on out there. There's no doubt. Nuclear triggers were developed out there. All sorts of experiments took place there. But that was all before.
Yeah.
My son, I think I told you, my adult son, when he was a teenager and we were there, he and 2 or 3 of his friends swam out to the island on a dare, which was a stupid thing to do because there's very swift, very dangerous currents there.
Yeah.
And they walked around the island. There was nobody out there.
Yeah, it's very, very big. It's bigger than you imagine. I think when you were here last, I showed you that documentary, didn't I, that they'd made over there. It's actually much bigger than I imagined. But
it's pretty good size.
Yeah, with all the bunkers and everything.
There's a couple of very good books on the island, all the history of the island. Now, it doesn't go into the classified stuff. It just says, this took place and that took place and experiments took place and so on and so forth.
So we've covered Nick Redfern's book. Now, there was a rumour going around that it was a SAS exercise. Now, I think we've poo-pooed that as well, didn't we, Chuck?
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Our people were authorized to use deadly force.
Yeah.
You don't do an exercise that's not well announced and all rules are laid out and the whole scenario when people have live ammunition.
Yeah, this is what we were saying.
Everybody in the WSA, they all carried automatic weapons. even have M60 machine guns and more I can't talk about. There's no way would someone do something stupid like that.
No, obviously it would have been like a war between UK and US, wouldn't it, on that soil? Because there would have been quite a few deaths involved with something like that.
What we did have is we had an inert WSA weapon storage area at Woodbridge that had been used years before, and it was a mock-up, almost identical to the one we had at Bentwaters. And we did do exercises with the Territorial Armor, the TA. But it was always laid out well in advance, and there were rules, and of course they cheated, and we cheated a little bit too, if you know what I mean. I don't mean with automatic weapons. I mean just, doing things where, well, you're not supposed to do
just
this or that.
Yeah.
But, we used smoke and we used dogs, and they didn't know about the dogs, and but it was an exercise to see what would happen, and gave them some experience, and I got to know them pretty well. In fact, I used to go down to their place in Ipswich and, have a drink or two with them, and I marched with them in the Remembrance Day 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, we did kind of really think that was a ridiculous story that came out, but I think it was said that it was actually an April Fool's joke at some point. But unfortunately, there are people out there that see that story and then take that on. Oh, well, that's what it was all about. That's what happened, and there's still people out there that believe that's what happened. But I think we can both safely say that
they're welcome to believe whatever they want.
Yeah, of course. And of course, there's still the lighthouse. Oh, by the way, the lighthouse has gone now, Chuck. You've probably heard.
I heard that. They tore it down.
Yeah, a few weeks back. Yeah, it's a shame, but there you go.
Yeah.
It was quite a landmark, wasn't it? And it was never seen flying.
It was.
It was never seen flying either, was it?
No, and it never moved it didn't go into the forest, doggone it.
No, but when you took us into the forest that night, there was no way you could have seen the lighthouse from there anyway, was it? We went there with that.
Certain places, when you were in certain places, you could see it.
Yeah.
When we moved up to the edge of the field across from the farmer's house, I could see it in the gap of the trees. There's sort of a gap in the trees off to the right, like I say, about 30 degrees off to the right. There's a gap in the trees where you could see the lighthouse. You could, but it was a white light.
That's right. It would have been the red colour.
It had lenses. It had a red and green lens that showed out to sea, and a white lens that showed into land.
Yeah.
But most of the time in the forest, you're right, you could not see it. But you could, from a certain point, you could see the lighthouse. At some point, I did see the lighthouse. But I knew about the lighthouse.
Yeah, I mean, you could.
I used to go out to Orford Nest because there's a couple good cubs out there.
Yeah, it's like you said, you could get distracted by it. If you were following other lights in the sky, you could actually take that and see it and think, oh, that's the same lights again. But then you'd realise it's not. I think John Barrows was fooled like that apparently when he was going across the field. For a short time, he thought it was the
probably.
Yeah, on that first night we're talking about.
I think he and Penniston chased the lighthouse for a while after they had the encounter.
Yeah, I think well in the book Jim says that he told John, he said, John, that's the lighthouse, but obviously they were chasing something different. Also, the same as what you were, and also there were reports of the radar readings, sightings, weren't there?
Yes.
So that kind of poo-poos anything about the lighthouse anyway, in my mind.
Well, no matter what you say or what I say, there's people out there that are going to believe all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even when you think of UFOs, it's crazy stuff, isn't it? But as you've always said, Chuck, you don't know what it was, and you've kind of
I don't.
You've always stuck to
it. Was
that.
Whatever I saw was under intelligent control. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And obviously it was something flying around in the sky, and it was it wasn't just one light over to the right, which would have been the lighthouse. So the book you're writing with John is, when do you expect that to appear?
I don't know. I've got all my notes, but I haven't put my last part together. I've given him all the rest of the stuff, and he's been plodding along, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Do you think it'll make it out in
sending me drafts, and he's doing a pretty
2021, do you think?
Oh, I think it'll be out next year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's been long awaited, hasn't it? I know it's been working on it for quite a long time. Also,
John's gone back and forth with lady friends, so it's been slowed him down a bit.
We won't talk about that. I say someone else that brought a book out recently is Steve LaPlume. I don't know how well it's selling. He seems to have disappeared off the radar as well now. I was speaking to him quite a bit on Facebook, and he said he was going offline because what's going on in America. He thinks it's all going to kick off into a civil war or something. But so he's kind of disappeared now. But his book came out, and although it's not strictly about the Rendlesham incident, it has got a bit of the incident in it. Apparently, I haven't read it yet. Did you do?
Well, he's had an interesting life.
Yeah, it certainly has. Yeah, I mean, it's been a racing drive.
He was a problem. He was a problem at Bentwaters.
Yeah.
He wanted out of the Air Force. He did all kinds of dumb things.
Yeah. Was he?
That's how I knew him.
Yeah. So was he kind of a problem, a bit like Larry Warren was?
No, well, he was one of Larry Warren's friends. He's not now. He obviously says, Larry Warren's whatever. I won't use the words he uses to describe him.
I have heard those descriptions. Yeah.
Profanity.
Even though I think
fraud.
Even though I think Larry Warren's got a statement on the back of Steve LaPoo's book, saying about his experience. And Steve's put it on the back of the book, but I've seen what Steve said about him separately. So, but. Yeah, so
Steve is probably settled down, but he had a lot of serious issues when he was at Bentwaters.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to have. He's met his demons, I think, because I did do a show with him a few months back, and he does admit he had lots of problems, and it's quite an interesting show to listen to him. Actually, he's had a very interesting life. Been a soldier of fortune.
Oh yeah, he was a mercenary. He did race motorcycles and did all kinds of things. Went to China and did who knows what all.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, have you got much else you want to say about?
I had a.
Sorry, Jim. John.
Pardon?
Sorry, Chuck.
No, I was going to say, Steve. I've been in touch off and on. Steve sends me an email every once in a while, and I respond. And I had a collector's item motorcycle that he was very interested in, but I lost it in a fire when I lost the place in West Virginia.
Right, yeah.
And he was going to come down and buy it. It was a classic road legal racing bike from 1972 with only 1,200 miles on it. And he was very interested in it.
Right.
But it's gone.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, the whole business about you losing your place in West Virginia was terrible anyway. Because I know you told us about that. You lost everything.
The only thing it did is it let me rebuild and correct all the things that I hadn't thought about when I built the original building. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
I lost everything from original oil paintings, a lot of family heirlooms, a lot of you can't believe the antiques I lost that I brought back from Germany and England.
That's a disaster. Did you get insurance? I mean, it's not my business really, but did you get insurance out of it or?
Oh yeah, they were very generous.
Oh yeah.
But first they challenged, and I gave them a 3 or 4 page list of stuff, and they said, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah.
And so they paid me my full premium, or my entitlement.
Yeah. There's still things they can't replace though,
which was enough to rebuild.
Like personal things they can't replace.
Oh no.
It's like those paintings and things. You can never replace those. But I mean, have you got anything else you want to say about Jim's book, or have you sort of said enough and you'd rather leave the rest for the book?
No, I guess the best thing I can say, it's a big disappointment, the book, and especially him, and letting himself being taken in and being used, because I think the code thing is a bunch of, whatever. You can draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that think
I don't know anybody that's...
Yeah, so I'll be interested to hear Gary Osborne's...
Everybody that I know...
Yeah, good.
Everybody that I know that has, knows what's going on says garbage.
Yeah, it's a shame because it's an amazing book to read, and to hear that it must be a bit disappointing, for myself included, because I thought it was a very interesting book. But as you know, when you were here, I gave you my copy, and I know you were glued to it for a couple of days, and I could see the aghast looks on your face with some of the things that were in it. But I think it was only fair that you had the chance to say what you thought about it. It's
Well, the most disappointing part of it was the stuff that he put in there from Neville's. And then he admitted that Neville sent him a whole lot more garbage and a lot of it personal attacks.
Yeah.
He said, I didn't dare, it was so bad couldn't put it in the book for fear of, being sued.
Right. Yeah, because he says in that book that a lot of that, because he wrote the book with Nick Pope and John Barrows, and he said that he'd given a lot of stuff to Nick Pope for the book that he wrote with him. What was that? The Rendlesham incident? I can't think what it was called. But he said a lot of it wasn't included in that book, and that's the reason he wrote this one. You know, so whether all the code stuff would have been in that book originally, I don't know, because I'm not sure they spoke.
I don't know.
I don't think they spoke about it much, did they, in the Nick Pope book? Yeah.
Well.
Anyway, what sort?
A couple of things I didn't say. When I did see the Notebook the first time when we were doing the UFO invasion at Rendlesham, the book was intact, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I didn't appear to be any missing pages. And when I asked later, I said, well, where was the code? He said, well, I took the code out. What do you mean you took out 20 pages or whatever it was? It would have been very obvious. He said, and then I put them back in. Oh, okay. There's always an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine when the incident happened in 1980, would it really have occurred to him to actually pull those sheets out? Because he says that, I mean, his comment is that he felt as if he was going crazy, so that's why he wrote those notes out at the time. Would you have? I mean, you knew him back then. Would that have been the sort of thing he would have done back then?
I didn't think so. I knew him before the incident very well because we worked together in the command post. He was the cop liaison for all the exercises, and we did at least one a month. And we'd be locked in the command post sometimes for days, and sometimes for 8, 10, 12 hours or more in a gas mask and a chemical suit and all that uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah.
Oh. And you're put under a lot of stress because the gas mask fogs up very easily, and you can't see your console, you can't read the screen, you can't find the buttons on the telephone.
I know.
Just enough to drive you crazy. I hated that stuff. I could have taken the exercises without the gas mask. And Jim was in there all the time, and he was being groomed to be a chief master sergeant. Now, I have to tell you, after he left Bentwaters, he was in trouble everywhere he went. He used to send me emails saying, and he never got promoted after that.
I see. Yeah, see, well, I think what I was getting at is that back then he would have been quite a younger man, and would he have been the same person as he is nowadays? You know, I mean, he's obviously a mature man, but back then he'd have been a younger, what was he? Been about 28, 29?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
27, 28.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the men on that base then were a lot younger than that, weren't they? They're sort of 18, 19, or 19, 20.
Yeah, most of them were, and it kept us busy because it was the problem. Because here they are over there, booze is cheap, drugs are available, locally, not on the base. Well, maybe on the base too, and there aren't that many women. And oh my goodness, it was a challenge because there were always issues with fighting over this, fighting over that, or frustration. A lot of the young cops would join the Air Force and be told they're going to be a cop. Well, what they envision is riding around a patrol car with a gun and turning blue lights on and doing this and doing that. They get the Bentwaters and they give them an M16 and a cami suit and put them out in the middle of nowhere 12 hours at a time or 8 hours at a time. They don't see anybody or talk to anybody except maybe somebody comes around occasionally with some food or to say hello.
Yeah.
And they get frustrated. It was very tough, boring life.
And cold as well, those nights if they're on guard duty.
Oh yes.
I can imagine. Yeah. I mean, I've walked around in those woods in the dark and in the cold, and it's not very nice. I imagine standing in one spot.
I used to go out a lot of times.
Yeah, I imagine standing in one spot for a few hours, nearly all night. It must have been awful. So
I used to go out occasionally, go out and just drive around at night and talk with all the patrols. And I remember one night I went out to the East Gate amongst other places. And the young guard out there was shaking like a leaf. I said, what's the matter? He said, I've seen East End Charlie. There was a rumor that at that time going around, in fact, it had been going around for years, I guess, that there was a British aviator or a German aviator from World War II that, haunted that area. He'd been shot down there. And he claims to have seen him.
Right.
Maybe he did. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I could tell you the kid was all but in shock. And so I spent, 15, 20, 30 minutes with him, and finally I realized this kid isn't going to make it tonight the way they're going.
Right.
I just called Central Security Control and said, this guy he looks sick. you need to send somebody out and replace this guy now. And so they sent somebody out, and the kid thanked me, and away he went.
Yeah. Because that's one of the stories he left at Eastgate, isn't it? Well, Larry Warren brought out the East End Charlie story. So obviously he picked up a lot of these stories off the base anyway. Because he wasn't there long enough to experience all these things anyway, was he?
He only spent a night or two, if that, on duty.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I mean, he wasn't...
The rest of the time he was...
I mean,
they used him... when he started talking, what I think what happened is they didn't know how to quietly get rid of him is a problem. So they gave him, how shall I say, non-cop duties. He did this, he did that, he was a runner, he went to a change of command ceremony and stood there and saluted. And I thought it was funny, in his book he says he went and he drank with the officers at the change of command ceremony.
Yeah.
My friend, I didn't get invited to drink with the senior officers. They were all senior colonels and generals.
Yeah, I've seen the photos of him in his dinner suit type of thing. That's obviously... Well,
he was a guard outside somewhere, or standing somewhere along the parade route.
But there's one where
he probably was.
But they've got one where they're all holding champagne glasses, and he's got like the dress officer suit with I think he was with Greg Bartram. But I mean, I'm not saying it is a Photoshop, but it was suspect. That picture, those photos.
Well, the reason I first said at one point that he may have been involved in the background is because he had so much documentation. But when the documentation got searched very closely and looked at, it's all photoshopped. It's all forgeries.
Yeah.
Gosh, even where he put his assignment to flight thing on, he put Lee Swaim, who was the first sergeant, misspelled his first and last name twice on the same document.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, how can you be...
Yeah, I actually went round to Donald Leisure's house, actually, earlier this year, just before all the lockdown and everything. Donald, he showed me loads of documentation, and he showed me Lee Swain's actual real signature. And he looked at the one on Larry Warren's, and it was kind of similar, but no, you could see it wasn't the same, you know. And obviously it wasn't spelled Swain either.
Well, look at the doctor's thing where he went to Lakenheath to the eye doctor.
Yeah, that's it.
It turned out to be an orthopedic doctor. We had an eye doctor, Lester Sharpen, on the base.
Yeah, Dr. Eccles was an orthopedic doctor.
I knew Lester Sharpen, our eye doctor, well, because we worked both with Boy Scouts.
But he obviously thought back then, because but this was before the days of the internet, so nothing was... He probably thought he could just say anything, and nobody was ever going to pick up on it, but because of the internet, I think that was his biggest enemy nowadays, as I've said a few times, when things are easy to check up on now. And, yeah.
Well, what really sent Peter Robbins over the edge is when I sent Peter the pictures that Sue McAllister has, the fake Bud Hopkins paintings.
Yeah.
Peter went crazy.
Yeah, I know he did. Yeah, he wasn't very pleased at all. Because Peter was very close.
Well, because he was a good. Well, he was sort of he was sort of Bud Hopkins' secretary.
Yeah.
Peter didn't make it much as an artist. In other words, didn't make money. I mean, he may have been talented, but he didn't make any money. And he had an interest in UFOs, and he hooked on to Bud, and Bud had no administrative skills. Believe me, he was not organized at all. And Peter latched onto him and took care of all that stuff for him.
Yeah.
In fact, Peter may have written his books. I don't know.
What the left at Eastgate, or you mean Bud's? Oh, I see what you mean.
Oh, Bud's book.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's something I've never actually given any thought to. Do you think he may have had a hand in helping him?
I certainly do.
Yeah, it's a possibility, I guess. Because I know he certainly really wrote Left at Eastgate, although because he's actually said that himself, didn't he? That he really had to. All he was given was loads of notes to put together, and that they wouldn't.
Oh yeah, well Peter's a good writer.
Yeah, and Left at Eastgate would never have come out if it hadn't been for Peter putting it all together. And obviously that was the value that Larry Warren saw in him, no doubt.
Yeah, that's why I think that Peter probably put together Bud Hopkins' books.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something.
But that's all right.
It's a thing I hadn't thought of, but yeah. So unfortunately, Buzz.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, unfortunately, Buz's not around to ask him. But anyway, so
Bud was a good friend of mine.
Yeah, I know. He's another person we lost too early. Unfortunately, we've lost a few people in the RFI too early, which would have been very valuable nowadays, wouldn't they? But
they sure would have.
So what sort of plans have you got for 2021, Chuck? Do you think you might better get over here again, or?
I don't know. If I get invited, I'm not. It doesn't cost anything other than to get me over there.
Yeah.
Expenses, as you know. I don't ask for
No.
a big honorarium or anything. Gosh.
No, as long as we can cover the
That's an
airfares.
interesting thing about Jim. Years ago, when Jim and I were doing a couple of talks here and there, we got invited to go somewhere. I don't even remember which one it was, and he said, "How much are you asking for?" And I said, "Just my expenses. I don't feel right taking any money for it." He said, "Oh, I don't speak at least $500 a day." I said, "What?"
Ugh.
Then later he told me, "Why donate all that money to charity?" I said, I started thinking, show me some receipts. I don't believe a word of that.
Oh, right. But, the thing is, a lot of these places can't afford any, when you came over, I think we just about cleared all the expenses, really. With for the hotels and the airplanes and everything. There wasn't a lot left over for, as extras anyway. So if I had to pay fees, I don't think we could have done it. It'd be coming out of my pocket.
Oh, I understand.
But, anyway, I do hope we can get you back over again, Chuck. Be great to see you again.
Well, I would look forward to it.
We'll have to see how things are going with all these lockdowns and flights and God knows what else. I think everyone will be going crazy next year. Everyone will be booking flights up. So they'll all be full up. But,
well, I do want to do one thing next year, and that's go to Roswell, only because I want to meet some of my old friends there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to Roswell myself. I had a guest on last week, actually. It's on this week, Erin Montgomery. She lives in Roswell, and she says it's a very dangerous...
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous town. Yeah, she's got
How's that?
Well, apparently there's a lot of murders there, so be careful, Chuck.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what,
Gosh, the last time I was there, I walked the streets.
Well, we did. I mean, Jill and I have been there to Roswell, and I do remember walking down the street, and there was a shop front, and it had a bullet hole in the window. So watch yourself. Yeah, it's Erin Montgomery, if you run into her. She's written a book called Confessions of an Alien Contactee, and her show is actually the show this week, last week. Or a couple of weeks ago, actually, when this show goes out.
Oh.
So, Erin Montgomery, if you keep an eye out for her. I'll actually tell her you're going to be visiting because she actually goes to the museum quite often. So, if you go to Roswell, would the event be at the museum?
It'll be the 4th of July, their big event.
Yeah, and it's at the museum, is it?
Yeah, I was supposed to go this past year, but, it all got canceled.
Yeah.
And what I have given them my original uniform, hat, jacket, pants, shirt that I wore that night, and a pair of boots that I didn't wear, but they're the same kind, so they can do a mannequin and put it in a case.
Oh, wow, that's good. What, for them to keep permanently?
Yeah, for them to keep.
Wow. That's excellent.
What am I going to do, leave it in the closet?
I suppose so, yeah. But what about the Cold...
For my kids to throw away someday?
Yeah, couldn't it have gone to the Cold War Museum, maybe? Or if you got another one, you could give them.
I might have a shirt and pants, but I only have one of the original jackets.
Because they'd probably like one of those in a glass case there, wouldn't they? Because, it was quite a big event at the time.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Well, maybe I shouldn't have said anything, eh?
Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
I think I still have another shirt, I think. I'll have to go look.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I kept them for a few years and put them away, thinking there's a possibility I might get recalled to active duty.
Well, yeah, you never know, do you? I think it's probably a bit late now. But,
well, I have to tell you a funny story. I have an uncle that I was young at the time, and I spent one summer with my grandparents because it was close to where I was my summer job. And my uncle came home from the Army, and he didn't do well in the Army. He was a lieutenant, maybe he made captain, but he was very unhappy and didn't like it, and he hated the Army with a passion. And he came home and took all his uniforms, and I remembered, put them out in my grandmother's driveway and poured kerosene on them and burned them all. About 2 months later, he got recalled back to duty and had to go buy all new uniforms. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, wouldn't you get in trouble for that? Because, I mean, do they still belong to...
They were issued to them.
Oh, I suppose they don't still belong to the government or whatever then.
Certain items do. You have to turn back in. funny thing is sunglasses and certain outer garments, but most of the shirts and pants and things like that you keep.
Right, I see. That was interesting, that. Anyway, Chuck, it's been fantastic talking to you. As I say, I do hope to get to see you this year, or next year, I should say. It'd be great if you can get you back over again. Well, I don't know, with Jill and I, we're moving, as you know. We were talking about coming over to the States next year, so I don't know how the money's going to go, or if we'll get the chance, but we're still working on that one. And we don't even know if the flights are going to be flying anyway, so what's going on?
Who knows?
Anyway, Chuck, Happy New Year to you and your family, and take care of yourself. And if you go to Roswell, watch out for those bullets flying about.
I will, and the best of you, and say hello to Jill and the dogs for me.
I will, yeah. They're looking forward to their new home. I'm not sure the dogs are, because I don't know yet, but... Anyway, Chuck, I'll let you go now. Thank you ever so much for sparing the time to come on, and hope to speak to you again. And take care of yourself.
Okay. Well, give me some feedback on the reaction to what we...
Oh, absolutely. I'll send you the link to the show anyway when it goes out. You can have a listen. Okay. You can have a listen to it with all the bits and pieces added onto it and everything. Okay. All right. Chick, it's been great talking to you. Thanks very much. Take care of yourself and your family. Right. Cheers.
All right.
Bye, Chuck. So there we are. I hope you all enjoyed that. That's another very rare interview with Colonel Charles Halt. It's a hard man to get hold of nowadays. If you've heard both shows for this 40th anniversary of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, I hope you've found it interesting and enjoyable. I'd just like to take this second opportunity to wish you all a happy new year and to let you know that you won't be hearing from me for 3 weeks. I'm taking 3 weeks off. Some may be pleased with that. I will be catching up and putting some of the later shows onto YouTube to try and catch up and get everything up to date. So the next show will be February the 1st, 2021. A whole new season of special guests and probably a few old names that might crop up again. Who knows? But anyway, I hope the year turns out better for you than it's been for many last year. I'll speak to you all again soon, and take care. Bye bye. Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
Just after midnight, late December 1980. Strange lights in the sky, glowing spears among the trees. The woods lit up like fire, electricity filled the air. All hell let loose in Rendlesham. Echo through the forest to the bone. Unidentified aerial phenomenon. Time froze, world stopped, reality changed. Lost in state of shock after encounter.